Okay, thank you very much. It's 11:50 and now time to resume the inquiry. Just one quick procedural point before we continue. I have just received notification that where I asked earlier whether there was any press present, press are present but virtually, so they are just watching remotely, just so that everyone is aware of that. Any other procedural matters at this stage before we move on? No? Okay, good. Right, okay, in which case we move to the statements from Keep Bee Lane Rural. I'll let you decide who wants to come up first. Okay, thank you. If you could make yourself comfortable and then introduce yourself. Thank you.
Morning, sir. Morning, everyone. My name is Graham Easton, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the residents group Keep Bee Lane Rural as an interested party. We exist to protect the area of farmland and community, referred to by planners as Pickerings Farm, from inappropriate development. Pickerings Farm is somewhat of a misnomer for the site, as the 272 acres is a collection of many old farms, including Crooks Farm, Balshaw Farm, Home Farm, Braids Farm, Lord's House Farm, Singleton's Farm, and of course Pickerings Farm, after which the planning proposal takes its name. Interestingly, the use of this name was never agreed with the owners and has caused them no end of grief since. Keep Bee Lane Rural was formed by local residents in 2018 to represent their concerns at the first master plan, submitted jointly by Taylor Wimpey and the government-supported Homes England. We are a broad church of enthusiastic amateurs, and our name was taken from Bee Lane, which runs directly through the middle of the site and is used extensively by walkers, cyclists and horse riders. None of us are of the age where social media is a thing in our daily lives. But somehow we created a Facebook group for the purpose of sharing documents and information amongst ourselves. We were left absolutely gobsmacked when it went viral, and we were inundated with offers of help from the local community. Not surprisingly, the likely impact of the Pickerings Farm development had not gone unnoticed by those using the area for recreation and anyone using the already over-congested local road network. Membership of the group now totals over 1,700 people. When this development was initially proposed, the residents were instantly divided into two camps: families with land to sell and those without. It would transpire that those with land would be consulted extensively by the developers, and those without land received little or no consultation and were told, and I quote here from first-hand experience, "Just get used to it, it's happening." I think it's fair to say what is proposed at Pickerings Farm is unprecedented anywhere in the UK. That is to build upwards of 3,000 houses for the full site, a 3,000 house community on top of an existing one, without any consideration as to what is to become of them. The forgotten 12 families have been totally invisible to the developers, or they simply chose to ignore their basic human rights. The initial scoping report was 1,413 pages long. To put that into perspective, War and Peace is 1,200. Within that entire document, not one single sentence was given over to the existing residents and how the new development might impact on them. Even the water voles got 11 pages. I know of individuals who are becoming ill through stress and sleepless nights over how they will live in the midst of this building site for the next 10 to 15 years. Quite possibly for the rest of their lives for some. I think the real nastiness of this submission was demonstrated by how the developers had chosen to place the highest density housing immediately adjacent to the existing residents. Originally 2 stories, then rising to 4. This was rejected by the planning committee and the applicant was told to reduce. They did reduce the 4 to 3, but then increased the 2-storey houses to 2.5 that are immediately adjacent to the existing residents. How unnecessary, petty and peevish. If this doesn't smack of arrogance and punishment, then I don't know what does. It's certainly not consultation engagement with the existing community. As stated previously, we're amateurs that have been thrust into a new world of large-scale development and planning process. As such, we would expect any master plan to be easily accessible and easy to understand. Not so with this latest submission. 282 individual documents, each one requiring downloading and assessing. This was a huge undertaking for us, but we found a plethora of misinformation and vast swathes of missing and incomplete information. Where was the Crossborough Link Road, for example? My colleague Mike, who's speaking after me, will be able to provide some more details. When the master plan was refused back in November 21, it wasn't a close-run thing. It was rejected unanimously across all the political parties, with major concerns from major statutory consultees such as Highways, the Environment Agency, and Network Rail, just to name a few. At this point, faith was restored in the local plan and the local democracy within the community. We understand the necessity for the appeal process, but you can imagine the subsequent disquiet within the community when it was announced that this appeal will be decided upon by the Secretary of State. Constantly I'm asked the questions, why has Pickerings Farm been singled out for special attention? And by whom? And on what grounds? Why in this instance has the local democratic process been hijacked by the government? No one seems to be able to give me these answers to these questions. We're not anti-development, just anti this master plan, although it's stretching the definition of that term to call it that. I think we all appreciate the unique opportunity that Pickerings Farm could offer the local community in terms of recreation, employment, housing and sustainable transport links. Ye gods, I mean, the site has a provincial railway line running around its eastern perimeter, yet no effort has been made to utilise this with a park and ride solution. What is proposed is a car-centric cul-de-sac that will be totally unsustainable and blight the lives of all those living under it and nearby. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eastham. Mr. Kikowski, did you have any questions?
Sorry, I'd quite like to hear what the next gentleman says and then decide if I might, sir,
okay,
to avoid repetition.
Will you be happy coming back up again?
Absolutely.
Yep. Just a couple of points of clarification from me as well. Will you be able to provide a copy of the statement you've just read out to the council?
I can either send you an e-copy or you can have my sort of well-thumbed copy.
Yeah, if you're able to send an electronic copy to the case officer, that'd be very much appreciated. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate you reading out from a statement and your comments about your disquiet at the appeal process. Hopefully I gave you an answer in my introductory remarks about the reason why the Secretary of State has recovered the appeal. Whether you're satisfied or not is really a matter between you and the Secretary of State rather than myself, but I have given you that justification that's been provided. There is one other point that I may come back to, but I may hear Mr. Bowe first if that's okay. So thank you very much indeed for that. Mr. Easton.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bowe. And similarly, will you be able to provide a copy of your statement?
As with Graham, I can provide a hard copy, which is well thumbed, or I can provide an electronic copy.
Or if you're able to email it to the case officer, that'd be brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Bowe. I'm a member of Keep Bee Lane Rural. As my colleague Graham Easton has said, we're a disparate group of concerned residents. We have no particular expertise in the subject of development planning, but have sufficient local knowledge and life experience to realise that the proposed development appears deeply flawed. We fully support South Ribble's unanimous decision in refusing this development and subsequent defence of that position in this appeal process. We also fully support Lancashire County Council Highways and Network Rail in raising major concerns regarding traffic impacts. We have confidence the inspector will take full account of the residents' concerns, of which there are many. We urge the inspector to pay particular regard to the evaluation of traffic impacts. We assure the inspector will remain grounded and will not be seduced by the vision and validate theory and hypothetical scheme aspirations. Firstly, to the layman, it appears highly unusual for Vectos to complete their assessment without agreement on methodology with the local transport authority, who I believe have a legal duty to secure the expeditious movement of traffic on the authority's road network. In other words, LCC Highways cannot abdicate their legal responsibility to a third party. Vectos appear to have failed to appreciate this fact. This lack of consensus has thrown considerable doubt on the validity of the Vectos conclusions. The Vectos vision and validate approach appears highly idealistic. In a nutshell, the majority of residents either cycle, walk, or take the bus to school, or to their health appointments, to work or to shop. Road traffic impacts are thus minimised and everyone lives happily ever after. It fails to account for the impact of dark mornings and nights, poor weather, child safety concerns, poorly lit footpaths, existing road congestion and poor quality infrastructure. To function, it requires adequate social infrastructure, excellent sustainable transport links, and significant local employment. To a layman, it appears that the approach is an experiment to be conducted on the local population without consent or proper contractual commitment. It is a complete act of faith. For example, it is inferred that road traffic demand will be suppressed by the availability of a large number of local schools. Again, we would urge the inspector to satisfy himself that local education capacity has been properly assessed. Many of the claimed local schools are more than 2 miles away or at close to or full capacity. Many of the local schools claimed to be within development catchment are in fact closer to other large committed developments, so there will be considerable competition for local places and little spare capacity. Unfortunately, the LEA, that's the Local Education Authority, employs an as the crow flies radius to define education catchment. Given the size of the site and its single main point of access on the western side, and with many of the claimed catchment schools to the east of the site, this does not appear to be a credible approach. Many of the claimed catchment schools will only be accessible by car because they are more than 2 miles away via busy roads. Many of the claimed catchment schools will have no available capacity or are closer to large committed developments. And also the claim that it is acceptable for children under 8 to walk up to 2 miles to school in all weathers at all times of the year and over age 3 miles is questionable. Because of the size of the site and the vision and validate approach, it is surprising that there has been no site-specific evaluation of population demographics to assess demand for local services and to test available capacity. We estimate the site population to be 3,643 people, of which 1,850 are of working age, 493 are preschool, 523 are primary, and 307 are secondary school children. Note, for context, the population of Penwitham is 23,000. We are concerned that there has been no account made of the population impact of the 30% social housing. This appears to be a significant factor strongly influencing child yield. As a result, we believe that primary school and secondary school populations and resulting trip rates may be seriously underestimated by Vectos. We believe that the trip impact of preschool provision has been entirely omitted. This is a significant failing. We also have concerns regarding the evaluation of commuting and leisure trips. Given the location and size of this site, we would question the assumption that 43% of commuting trips are less than 3 miles. We estimate that this site will have a working population of 1,584 people and question the source of local employment that would accommodate 680 jobs. Analysis of the City Deal has also shown that since inception, the City Deal region has built over 7,000 homes, yet strangely, in this region, there has been no net increase in business rate collection or private sector jobs creation from inception to the start of the pandemic. One possible explanation is that many of the jobs are located outside the City Deal region, with many of the major housing developments located close to motorway junctions, specifically to provide dormitory housing. We believe that this site is also designed to provide dormitory housing with its location close to the M6. It appears that local housing need will be saturated as South Ribble has more than 10 years housing supply. Therefore, we do not consider the 43 local journey split credible, and we believe that the commuting trip rate is a significant underestimate. We also have significant concerns relating to the estimation of leisure trips. Vectos claim this category covers, for example, walking the dog, shopping for a pint of milk. The reality is that this covers all forms of shopping deliveries, banking, holidays, religious service, visiting friends, sport, entertainment, etc. Vectos claim 50% of such trips occur within the site boundary and are thus discounted, but provide no justification. Again, we find this assumption lacking in credibility, and as such we suspect that leisure trips have been grossly underestimated. We are concerned that existing congestion on local roads will make the provision of sustainable transport unattractive or non-viable to users. Locals will tell you that congestion and traffic volume on Leyland Road, Pope Cop Lane, Coot Lane and Penwitham Way makes cycling positively dangerous. For the vision and validate approach to work, there needs to be significant investment in local education, health and leisure facilities. There needs to be significant improvement in local employment prospects and properly designed segregated cycle paths and pedestrian crossings. There needs to be a firm contractual commitment to reliable, regular bus services. In other words, the vision and validate objective cannot be achieved on a shoestring. We believe that there is insufficient local infrastructure to sustain a population influx of 3,643 people, and the vision and validate concept will likely fail, and local roads will gridlock as residents are forced to travel further afield for key services. We would urge the inspector to carefully consider the impact of the lack of cross-borough link road. In essence, the site becomes a cul-de-sac with only one main route for access via the A582. The local impact of the development during construction and occupation is likely to be profound. Indeed, very little has been mentioned about disruption on the A580 during construction, which could extend over 10 years. All users will recognise that the A582 is currently severely congested, especially during peak hours. We are sure Neil Stevens will expand on this issue in the coming days. Our understanding of the City Deal finances lead us to believe that there is very little prospect of the A582 widening being completed in the foreseeable future. The B Lane Bridge is another area of concern. Network Rail sum up the concerns of Keep B Lane rule perfectly. They say the notable increase proposed in the mixed-use traffic will increase the risk of accidents and incidents occurring on the B Lane Bridge, and further state, while the probability of an accident occurring on the bridge might be considered low, the subsequent disruption to all users would be significant. So you can imagine if a car passes through the parapet of the bridge trying to avoid a pedestrian. And B-Lane Railover Bridge is currently unsuitable for increased highways and pedestrian traffic flows. The project should be required to show that a new railover bridge spanning the West Coast line could be constructed on an alignment which facilitates access to the development. It is clear this bridge was designed to accommodate a farm track with a width of about 5.56 metres. It is now intended to provide two-way access to vehicles, cyclists and pedestrians. Given the large car is 1.9 metres wide and there is a requirement for vehicle clearance and a pedestrian safety margin, that leaves less than 0.7 of a metre for pedestrian access. Given the delivery van is likely to be 2.2 metres wide and a typical double buggy is 0.8 of a metre wide, the intended purpose does not appear remotely feasible, and KBLR consider this a major safety concern. Just have a drink. We have serious concerns regarding the flood prevention design. The artificial flood basin at the north end of the site has a capacity of approximately 16,000 cubic metres. It is concluded that approximately 32,000 tonnes of spoil will be excavated to achieve this capacity. We believe that this spoil will be employed to construct raised earthworks to the south of the basin, and I quote, at a minimum level of 0.63 metres above the predicted 100-year event water level. I've not been able to find out what that 100-year event water level is, but it's likely that this raised earthwork could well be a metre high. A drawing by McCloy in Appendix 11.1 shows the raised earthworks. This drawing shows several existing properties partially or completely surrounded by these raised earthworks, as well as adversely impacting the visual amenity. Such significant changes to topography are certain to increase flood risk and may make the properties uninsurable. Equally disturbing is figure 4.15 in Appendix 11.1 that shows the design of the flood basin and the raised earthworks to the south act preferentially to flood Kingsfold to the north, in effect sacrificing Kingsfold to save the development during an extreme flood event. It is noted that the village hall at Kingsfold is badly impacted by such flooding. KBR supplied photographs of significant flooding that is observed on the site. The authors of the flooding report in Appendix 11.1, Section 3.1, argued that these pictures are historic and in fact help validate the hydrological model by claiming that the flooding shown is predicted in the model as a 1 in 30-year event. Residents would argue that the observed flooding occurs routinely every few years. On this basis, KBLR believed that the model is flawed as it significantly underpredicts extreme flooding. Lastly, KBLR are concerned that any economic benefits arising from the development may be non-existent or marginal. As mentioned previously, since inception, the City Deal region has built 7,000 houses to the onset of the pandemic. In the same period, no measurable increase in business rate collection nor private sector net jobs creation has been observed. The City Deal appears to be overspent, underfunded, and is significant and insignificant and consistent financial deficit, which has added to the local tax burden. Local traffic congestion from the development, construction and occupation and associated ill health impacts will add further cost to the local economy with little tangible benefit. Of course, the destruction of a high-quality recreational amenity and wildlife habitat presents a loss to the community which is immeasurable. I've finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bow. Did you have any questions at
Well,
all?
so there is just one question, but before I ask that, so I'll just explain that you'll remember earlier on you mentioned about checking to see whether we'd responded sufficiently to the points raised by the group. And obviously we've just heard quite a few points about highways matters, and I need to double check whether we've covered all of those or not. So once we've received the written transcripts, if you like, the statements themselves, we're set to task, and if Braxton needs to put a supplementary note in to deal with the points which have been raised here, do that. I'll double check on the flooding. I think we've covered all the points. I'm not sure about the height of the embankment, and I'll double check that. And as I've said earlier on, we're looking to the education side. We've already commented on this. So that's how I intend to deal with all those points. Nothing's going to be gained by me asking questions about all of those points, but I do just want to ask one point of principle, really, and I don't mind which gentleman answers it if you can select amongst yourselves. But I just wanted to understand whether, given the things that you've said, there's an objection by Keep B Lane Rural, where there's an objection by Keep B Lane Rural to the actual allocation itself of the site with the various aspects which are set out in the local plan. So is this in effect a root and branch objection to the development per se, or is it that you accept the allocation is there, that the allocation is for a considerable number of homes to be built on the overall site, as you know, 1,350, and then the safeguarded land in the future? Are you okay with all of that, but it's the particular applications you object to? That's what I just want to understand. Is it the allocation and the applications, or the allocation is fine?
We'd have to sort of consult further with and wider with the members, but I think the basic understanding is we fought this particular master plan,
right,
and it's this particular master plan that we object to.
Right.
We are not anti-development, and I think we all see that there is a tremendous opportunity in Pickerings Farm. We just don't think that this is sustainable and benefits the local community. All right, thank you. Just a few follow-up questions from that, so, if I may. So just going back to the question, so you'll know that the local plan allocates it's the local plan that calls it Pickerings Farm, by the way. Our name for it was something else, but never fear. So the local plan allocates a wide area, these particular applications for about 2/3 of that land, but the local plan itself allocates the wider area. It allocates it for a considerable number of new homes and other development. And I'm just trying to understand whether there's an acceptance by Keep B Lane Rural of that allocation and all the implications that flow from it, or not. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Personally, I'm struggling to see how a development of this scale can be sustained with the existing infrastructure that we have.
Right.
Okay, so
well, I think what happened is this land, the reason why there was a general sort of acceptance that this land would go in the local plan stems back to the sort of 70s and the new town. So I think this idea has been mooted around for a long time, but I think what's happened since then, and it's a bit like the analogy of the frog in the boiling water. What's happened
It's a new one on me.
Well, if you increase
gradually
the slowly, it
temperature.
doesn't jump out, basically.
Right,
I think
okay.
what has happened is, obviously, to exacerbate the problems that have really always been there, but have got worse. So now but particularly the highways and things. So it's really, because it's the last to go, I think.
Okay, now I understand.
Which is highlighted.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk across you.
No, it's fine.
I understand what you're saying. You understand that we disagree. But just going back to my question, so perhaps if I can put it this way, is the allocation still accepted by your group? Because you said it was accepted. Is it still accepted? In other words, is the allocation okay, as far as your group's concerned, but there's something wrong with these applications? That's what I'm trying to understand.
could you explain what you mean by allocation, just
The
for
local
clarity?
Plan. No problem at all. The local plan, that's South Ribblewell's local plan, allocates the site. That's to say, it draws a line around the site on a map in the local plan, and it tells us that, and it's site this is very romantic, this language, it's site EE, don't ask me why, but it's site EE, and that is allocated for, and this is a indicative number, 1,350 homes, and then land to the south of that allocation, so going down to Coot Lane, is safeguarded for future development even later on in the process. So that's what the local plan does.
Everything's so much changed that I don't think we can commit to that. I don't know, it's just that
Just be aware that when you're conferring,
Yeah.
you may be heard
It's
through
okay, I mean,
the microphones, okay?
We don't want
Just
anybody to hear.
Yeah.
push the microphone away.
So perhaps if I just continue. So that's the allocation in the local plan, which has been through a process. An independent person, another inspector, an independent person looked at all that, signed it off, so to speak, and it's now something that has to be followed unless there's a good reason for not following it. So that's the local plan, and then we come along, Taylor Wimpey and Homes England, we come along and we have within our control about 2/3 of that overall allocation, and we're proposing, as you know, up to 1,100 homes on our bit of the overall site. So so what I'm trying to understand is, because a number of the points you made sort of seem to me to be more root and branch objections to the whole idea of building a lot of new homes in this area, rather than the particular batch of new homes that we propose to build. Do you see what I mean? That's what I'm trying to understand.
I think I'll try and be clear. My concern is that there isn't sufficient infrastructure to sustain the kind of numbers that we're talking about here.
Okay.
And when the local plan was first mooted, perhaps the traffic congestion wasn't as great, and the environmental concerns were not properly understood then. Since then, a lot has changed, and feelings have changed. People are becoming very concerned about congestion, for example, and I think, as Graham said, we're not objecting to a development of this size, provided there is sufficient infrastructure in place to support it.
Okay.
And the feeling amongst the members is that that the infrastructure falls far short of what's required to make it sustainable.
Okay.
But as I said before, we are a broad church, and
Yes.
we will have members that are categorically anti-development.
Yes.
Openly, and I
Sure.
will admit that.
That's fine. By the way, please feel free to sit down. You poor chap. I'm not used to people kneeling, so.
Yeah, it's very difficult, because we will have some people who oppose development per se.
Indeed. Because, I'm sorry, as Mr. Orsby just pointing out to me, perhaps the clue is in the name, Keep B Lane Rural, might actually tell you that there's a root and branch objection to the idea of a considerable number of new homes. I mean, the local plan would have it as 1,350. That's just on the allocated land. There's safeguarded land as well, so more in the future. So, the very name of your group would suggest that there isn't a particular fondness for that idea. I mean, would that be fair?
I think that lack of fondness has just been borne out by the level of development.
Okay.
Because obviously 3,000 is mentioned in the local plan.
I don't know where the 3,000 comes from, to be honest. I must admit that one's a new figure on me. That one's a new figure on me, 3,000. But
including C2.
including other allocations.
It's safeguarded.
Okay, but I'm not sure if you're talking about the safeguarded land to the south of the allocated site. I'm not sure about the 3,000 figure. I can't say that one jumps off the page to me, but that's doubtless my problem, not yours. Can I just also then ask a question of clarification, because it was said by Mr. Bow that the objection is to this particular master plan. So I just wondered if I can understand what's meant by that, because you'll know that we've got two planning applications. They're called A is the bigger one and B is the smaller one. And accompanying those planning applications, there's a master plan for the entire allocated site, not just the bits of land that we want to build on, but the entire allocated site. And when you say the problem is, or the objections are to this particular master plan, I wonder whether you meant that, or whether you actually meant the two individual planning applications themselves, because we've got a master plan for the whole allocation, and I'm not sure that the points you've raised really go to that, as opposed to the individual planning applications. Do you understand the difference or not?
Okay, well, for me, the master plan, the traffic assessment leaves a lot to be desired. The traffic assessment for the master plan.
Right. But our traffic assessment is of our appeal proposals, because we're not proposing to build across the entire allocated site, because we only control 2/3 of it. I mean, I say only, it's a lot of land, but it's still only 2/3 of a much larger area of land that is the allocation. So our master plan shows how the entirety of the allocation in the fullness of time could be brought forward. It shows how our two bits, one really big and one much smaller, could plug into the overall master plan and help it rather than trip it up. But I'm not sure whether you're really criticising the overall master plan for the entire allocated site, or whether you're actually saying we don't like these two particular planning applications, because the two things are not the same. They're related, but they're not the same.
Both. You can still answer objection to both, presumably.
Of course you can. You have as many objections as you like. I mean, I'm just wondering what.
So personally speaking, I'd probably go for the object to both.
Right. So the master plan and the.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a bit of a legal argument, this, but in terms of...
Just because I'm a lawyer, don't think that my arguments are legal ones. It's a common sense.
I'm not quite sure where this is going, and I think that's the point.
Well, it's trying to clarify what it is that you object to. That's why I've asked whether you're okay with... Give me one moment, sorry. Forgive me. That's why I've asked whether you're okay with the allocation or not. So do you object to the allocation itself? We've discussed that. Then you said the problem is this particular master plan. It's not a legal argument at all. In front of this inquiry, the inspector has a thing called the master plan. He also has two planning applications. And if you object to the whole lot, that's fine. I'm just trying to clarify what it is that you object to.
Yeah, the difficulty we have, we're representing, as Graham said, we're representing a group of people.
Sure.
I can only speak from my personal view.
You're the only person I've got, well, the two of you are the only people I've got here. Yeah.
So for me, I have concerns about both.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed. Good. That's helpful clarification. So I'll commission some notes on the technical points that have been raised.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you both for your statements there. It's appreciated. Right. Okay. Well, that moves us on to the design and master planning evidence of Dr. Price. Do we need to have 5 minutes to allow Dr. Price to take his seat?
What I was going to suggest, sir, I don't know whether this is convenient to you or acceptable, but what I was going to suggest is that perhaps we have it's 25 past 12 according to that clock, whether we have an earlier lunch adjournment and have all of his evidence during the course of the afternoon.
Okay, that sounds sensible.
I have no problem with that at all. So.
Okay. Right. Any other matters before we adjourn then? We will adjourn now at 12:27 and come back in 1 hour. If we take a full hour for lunch.
Should we round it up to 1:30 then, sir?
Sorry?
Shall we round it up to 1:30?
We should, shouldn't we? Yes,
Thank
yeah.
you,
Yep. Okay, we'll be back at 1:30 then. Thank you.
Very much indeed.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. It's 1:30, time to resume, and we now turn to the evidence of Dr. Price for the council. Thank you very much. Are you comfortable? Got everything ready?
I think so, yeah.
Good.
Find out
Okay,
soon enough.
excellent. Right, thank you. In which case, over to Mr. Ponton.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Dr. Price.
Good afternoon.
You should have with you your proof of evidence, which
I do.
contains within it a summary and conclusions section, together with some appendices. Do you have that?
I do.
Super. Let's introduce you to the inquiry, shall we? Page 2 of your proof, paragraph 1.1, you set out your qualifications, is that correct?
That is correct.
I won't read those out, and then in the ensuing paragraphs give us some detail about some of your professional experience. Again, so I'm working on the basis that we can take the written proof as read, including these introductory passages.
Indeed, yes.
I'm
Thank you.
very grateful. Thank you. Well, then let's turn to your role in terms of appearance on behalf of the Borough Council at this inquiry. You tell us at paragraph 1.5 that you were instructed in May 2022 by the Borough Council to give evidence on design matters in support of the Council's reasons for refusal for the 2 appeal schemes. I just want to understand, on the basis that you accepted that instruction, which you did, what you then proceeded to do in very broad terms.
Well, I came up to discuss the appointment with the council, and we went on an extensive site visit, And I suggested that I conducted a sort of an impartial, independent analysis of the master plan by way of analysing its strengths and weaknesses. It wasn't my intention ever. I mean, I used to run design review service to just focus on the negatives, but also to look at the master plan in its totality. And I've attempted to provide a balanced view of the master plan in my proof of evidence.
Okay, well, we'll come on to some of your conclusions about the master plan and in some respects the design code in due course.
Mm-hmm.
Section 2 of your evidence, which starts at page 5 with national policy and then proceeds through, amongst other documents, to the local plan, addresses policy in general terms. I don't want you to take us through the detail of any of that policy. I just want you to explain to the inspector how you perceive policy, national and local policy in general terms, how you perceive its treatment of good design as a factor and how important that is within national and local policy.
Well, since I qualified as an architect almost 30 years ago, it's risen up the agenda. I mean, PPG 3 being a big advancement in the late 1990s through things like Building for Life, and then mentioned in the NPPF with the National Design Guide, National Model Design Code. There's been, it's risen up the agenda. I would argue that it needs to be very high. Placemaking is what drives me. Creating good places is what my career's been about. So I genuinely, think it has risen. I think it could rise higher, and I think good regard needs to be placed to high regard needs to be placed on placemaking.
Okay, with that in mind, with that in mind, let me ask you about the need for master planning. I mean, we've got a site here allocated in the local plan for up to 1,350 dwellings plus other associated development. What do you see as the importance of having a proper master planning process for an allocated site such as that at Pickerings Farm?
Well, an agreed master plan and design code is needed for sort of large, complex strategic sites such as this. There's lots of different elements to this. There is, as we've heard from the members of the B Lane group earlier, lots of properties on there, lots of other impacts on this development, and the need to provide proper connectivity across the whole development site. Now, this is one of the issues that only a master plan approach, a comprehensive master plan approach, can really do. If you leave it to piecemeal development, you're going to end up with a confused and non-coherent place. So the adoption of a master plan approach is why it's included in Policy C1 of the local plan.
Okay. Just note one of the guidance documents to which you refer in your proof at page 7 at paragraph 2.5 is building for a healthy life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the core documents.
Yeah.
And you tell us that the objectives, the 12 objectives set out in that document have formed the basis for the analysis that you undertake in your proof. Why is it an appropriate basis for your assessment, do you say?
Well, Building for a Healthy Life and its predecessor, Building for Life 12, and its predecessor, Building for Life 20, have been established for getting on for 20 years, and I was involved in some of that establishment early on with CABE. They set out a set of good headings, good rules, good things for placemaking, and it's on that basis that I've adopted them just as a mechanism by which to analyse a place. It's no more than that. I've not conducted a full scored system. In fact, the latest iteration, Building for a Healthy Life, is moving away from the sort of the scoring, and it steadily has done over the years. Some would argue that's not been necessarily a good move, but from the old scores out of 20 to the green lights and the amber lights and the red lights that we'll all be aware of. But it's more of a tool for discussion. So I've used the 12 headings just as a series of 12 headings by which to measure. Now, in some cases, with an outline application such as this, and I mentioned that in my proof, there isn't much information on some of the more detailed areas, but that's inevitable, and I've mentioned that, and given credit to that. But I just thought, you need a framework, you need a set of headings, and that's essentially what they've what they've served as in this
Okay,
case.
we'll come on to one or two of those in a moment or two. Just turn on to page 10 of your proof, if you would. There's a section headed the Master Plan Context, section 3. And at paragraph 3.2, you note that there's no dispute surrounding the suitability of the appeal sites for residential development, given that they form part of an allocated major site for development in the local plan. So no dispute about the principle of development, obviously, since this is an allocated site. But how important would you say it is for the appellants to demonstrate that the whole of the allocation site can be successfully developed and delivered through a proper master planning process? How important is that?
Well, as I said before, this is a key strategic site. It's the largest in South Ribble area. It provides a big chunk of their housing allocation, and it has impacts beyond the red line of the site. So it's important that all of those things, and the complication from the 40-odd private uses across the site, including homes and a number of businesses, mean that a comprehensive sort of master plan approach is required to make sure that the proper place is delivered, and in line with the vision. You know, I mean, the master planning process is one of setting a vision and then trying to deliver it. So, you know, to deliver that vision, you need to be able to illustrate how that vision can be delivered. So I think it's vitally important that a master plan, a comprehensive master plan, sets out that and shows how that can be achieved.
Okay. We note page 12 of your proof, start of section 4, is where you commence your assessment of the master plan and indeed the design code. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then using the categories set out in building for a healthy life, you start first with the subject of natural connections. You can see that towards the foot of page 12, can't we?
Yep.
Okay, and then if you like, the first substantive point that you note dealing with the requirement for connections is at paragraph 4.1.4 on page 14, where you refer to limitations due to the incomplete spine road which terminates abruptly, effectively creating a large cul-de-sac. I want you to explain your concerns that arise out of the treatment of east-west connections across the allocated site as shown in the master plan, and in fact how intended to be delivered through these planning applications. What are your concerns about that?
Well, it's a fundamental thing that you look for in a good master plan, that places are connected to the wider community in as many ways as possible. And the vehicular connections to this one for up to 900 homes is via, I think it was described earlier, as a giant cul-de-sac off the Penwortham Way, and that is essentially what is being created with this break in the spine road, the CBLR. So it's my guess, and I think a pretty educated one, that this master plan was built around the idea of this higher level in the hierarchy of streets, spine road, and built off that, and built with that in mind. Now, when that is broken, when that connection is broken, it affects every other aspect of the master plan. And what we've got here with the two applications, the application A and B, is the white space in between, the bit where there's no allocation and no indication of how that part of the link road can and will be delivered, which means that we need to look at these applications in their own merits as applications that essentially are, a phrase I use with my students sometimes, is that it's like a lollipop development. It's got a stick and then a great big bit of development off that one stick, that new connection to the Penwortham Way. So that is essentially what we're dealing with. And there are implications to lots of other aspects that I will come to in my proof, and I'm sure I'll be asked about later, about what will happen if that link road, that CBLR, is not complete and remains incomplete.
Just before you get there, can I ask you to think about this? The appellants will say that, of course, the master plan that they produce shows an entire east-west connection across the allocated site in the form of the spine road, which it does.
It does.
Does the master plan or any other associated document, whether it be infrastructure delivery schedule or anything else, tell you how all of that and when all of that is going to be delivered?
It tells you the bits within the red line of the A and B applications, and it indicates that they will be delivered. I think it's in phase 2, phase 1, the road coming through, but it doesn't tell you about the whole connection, and that is the issue here, really. There's no indication as to when that connection will be made, and therefore when the master plan in its entirety and its vision can be delivered, as far as I see it, because it's required for that master plan to be delivered for this connection to be made.
Okay, let's go back to what your concerns are on the basis that isn't delivered and there is no indication of when and how it can be delivered. What are your concerns that arise out of that incomplete delivery issue?
Well, there are a number, like I mentioned before, about the hierarchy of streets and the way that people use connections between places. Without that road, and I know this will be dealt with in more detail in Mr. Stevens' evidence, the issue about access to the existing lanes and use of the existing lanes, it's been a movable feast. It started off in the master plan and design access statement with a mention of maybe bollards. They sort of metamorphosed into bollards and sleepers and trees, and then there was a mention of ANPR, number plate recognition. I understand this has developed, but I have concerns that people will be able to effectively limit cars off the lanes, and in the instance of an incomplete CBLR, that will cause a problem as people seek to rat run, causing all sorts of negative effects across the whole development. With a complete CBLR, that problem is diminished because most people, I think it's fair to say, would take the most obvious route and take the new, what looks like to be a potentially attractive road with the swales and the landscaping and all of that. But without that connection being there, people will find a way through. They will find a way through to avoid potentially, if they're going to the east, they won't need to go all the way and then round onto a road which has been identified already this morning as having congestion issues. So people will find a way through those lanes. So I do have issues around how this plan will operate without the connection.
Just so we're clear, what the appellants will say is, what they have said in Mr. Axon's evidence in particular, is that it's going to be made physically difficult for vehicles to move from new development roads into the lanes. It's going to be made physically difficult for that to happen, and potentially there will also be criminal sanctions if people do attempt that manoeuvre. Are those matters that you're going to leave to Mr. Stevens, or are you going to deal with those?
I'll leave the enforcement bits to Mr. Stevens. It's probably his role as highways, but I think just in very general terms, I mean, these are things that have emerged during the course of this inquiry, because at the outset it was just mentioned that the cars would not, new development cars would not be allowed onto the lanes, and there was a small diagram, I think, in the master plan of some narrow posts that would prevent turning. How that's going to be enforced and enforceable, I'm not convinced at the moment, personally, but I'm not an engineer, and that I'm very glad. But I do think there is an issue with how that will be enforced, and the implications of it not being enforced are, I think, significant. No, I think that's probably everything. I can't remember what I was going to add to that.
I think you said there was a reference to an image showing some bollards in the master plan.
There is. That's where I was going to go.
I was going to give the inspector the reference for that. We're going to come back to it, no doubt, with Mr. Stevens in due course. I'm not sure whether it was...
Was it the code? Is it in the code?
I think it might have been in the design and access statement, actually, rather than the master plan.
And I do understand that has been developed via some paragraphs in Mr. Axon's proof and in his rebuttal, which seems to add a new layer of how it's going to be controlled each time. Quite what there's going to be by the time it happens, maybe there'll be helicopter surveillance, I don't know, but there may be another layer of stopping it, landmines, I don't know.
CD 1.17 is the design and access statement, isn't it, Dr. Price?
Yes.
CD 1.17, and I think it's page 44.
It is indeed.
Was that the?
hold on one moment. So
Of
if
course.
it's using the document electronically, it might not
Just
be on the page.
Just bear with me a moment. It should be there.
Page
shortly.
44 of the original one.
It is of the paper version. So
Uh,
I haven't got a PDF page number for you just now.
It's
It's-
document 1.17.
It's within a section 6.
It's also 44 in the PDF. Same page number then, so page 44.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
That's good.
48.
44.
Sorry, right. 44 of.
Of core document 1.17.
Right.
So you should be able to just type 44 into the
Yeah.
box.
Yeah, sure.
See if I know anything about these things.
It might be taking a while to load because it's
Yep. I have
Quite a-
already preloaded some of
Oh,
the documents I
super.
suspected would be used, but not the original.
So if you're having difficulty getting there, perhaps I'd just ask you to note that
Yep.
that that's where you find the the proposal for the bollards that I think Dr. Price has referred to. It's
Yeah.
page 44 of the Design and Access Statement. And no doubt you can look at that at your leisure.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there is a concern that without the entire connection, there'll be improper use of the lanes, vehicular use of the lanes. Is there any other concern that you have, Dr. Price, about the interruption in east-west connection across the allocated site that might be generated by the appeal schemes?
Yeah, the master plan sets out a bus loop. It's actually on several pages in the master plan for public transport, which obviously on a scheme which is predicated upon getting people out of private cars is really vital. That bus loop wouldn't be achievable without the full CBLR. It does mention again, I think in Mr. Axon's proof or his rebuttal, that there'd be bus gates. That was the first mention that I'd seen of that. I'm unclear as to where those would be located and how they would work and how they would allow a bus service to enter and leave the site. So that was another concern, that it may well have a negative effect on the public transport and effectively increase car journeys.
All right. Let's just, again, give the inspector some references to the position in respect of public transport. Do you have the master plan, CD 1.16?
Find the right bit. The proposed bus route is shown on page 23.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Can I take you to a reference in the master plan,
I
please?
apologise.
Listen carefully. So I don't know if you've got the master plan loaded on your...
I have. Yes.
Okay, so within that page 22, so it's page 22 in the hard copy, sir. I'm going to... Thank you very much. It contains 3 columns of text on the left-hand side of the page that I've got. Do you have that?
Yep.
Super. And then if we look at the third column, so this is what the master plan says about buses. Second paragraph down the third column, it says a new vehicular site access is proposed on Penwitham Way in the form of a traffic signal junction. This can be designed acknowledging the County Council's desire to improve the capacity of the corridor. Access can be provided for a new or extended bus service servicing the site accessing via Penwitham Way with an internal loop provided to ensure good penetration and access to services. So that's the reference, as I understand it, Dr. Price, in the master plan to bus services and an internal loop. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's a reference. It's also indicated on some plans as well, where there's a yellow dotted line. You just need to find the right plan. And it's in the design and access statement, as I said, on page 23 and in other places.
Okay, all right.
But that indicates the route, which does take in the part of the CBLR which is not complete.
So just so we're clear, in terms of a bus being able to undertake a loop without a full east-west connection across the allocated site, does that appear to be possible as part of these schemes?
Not in the way it's indicated in the master plan.
Okay. Now, in Mr. Axon's evidence, not in the master plan, but in Mr. Axon's evidence, and it's his proof at paragraph 4.17. And I'll say this confidently, knowing that we're all looking at pieces of paper as opposed to a screen. It's page 27. Got that? Have you got page 27, Mr. Axon's proof?
No, I don't. I've got the wrong proof. Just one moment.
It's Mr. Axon's proof.
So it's one of the core documents. If you
Yeah, what's the
needed
CD reference again? I'm
electronically.
sorry.
Mr. Axon's proof, which
I'll get
is
it electronically. I picked the wrong one up. Yeah.
Very, very nice people. If I make you a cup of tea next, Mr. Dr. Price, for helping you out with these references.
Thank you very much. That's all right. I picked the wrong on page 32.
hard copy 27, Miss Bell, electronic 31. Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Okay. 4.27.
4.17.
Oh, 17. Yeah.
This is referring to the use of the lanes, isn't it? And what he says there is that there'll be no vehicular access to the sites along these lanes. That's a point that we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Except for B lane, west of the B lane bridge for access to part of application A, and for bus shared travel movement. Do you see that? So
I
there's
do.
a suggestion there that buses are now going to be using B lane. Does that suggestion appear in the master plan?
No, it doesn't.
Have you seen any detail about how that's to be achieved?
No, I haven't.
I'll come back to the B lane bridge in a minute and safety concerns about that. But in terms of your general concerns regarding the use of the lanes, does the fact that buses may be able to access them give rise to any concern or not?
It would give rise to concern given the, in some ways, very encouraging indication that the lanes are going to be used as sustainable transport networks for cyclists and pedestrians, for children walking to school, and for all sorts of things. I mean, they're very narrow lanes anyway, as a visit to the site will show anybody very quickly. And buses every 30 minutes going along them may cause issues of conflict. Again, I'd very happily leave that to my highways colleague to explain in further detail in due course. But in urban design terms, I think there could be an issue with safety and quality of place and quality of these as sustainable networks if there are buses using them, in addition to some of the additional heavy traffic that will probably be using them for the existing businesses, for the dairy, and the builder's yard and various other uses that are located in that area anyway. So it does add to concerns over the general quality of these sustainable networks.
And then just finally on buses, whilst we've got Mr. Axon's proof of evidence to hand, can you turn over the page, please? Page 28 in the hard copy version.
Mm-hmm.
And paragraph 424 refers to discussions that have apparently occurred between Mr. Axon and two bus operators, Arriva and I think Stagecoach is the other one mentioned at the top of the next page. And he refers in 424, this is Arriva, to a proposal to operate a fixed route service at times of greatest demand and demand responsive services at other times, reacting in both size of vehicle and provision to the level of demand. So that's Arriva. And then paragraph 425 at the top of the next page, Stagecoach have expressed an interest, currently working on a proposal, but operating buses through the site may unlock substantial advantages. Do you see that?
I do.
Have you seen any proposals, whether it be by reference to routing or frequency of services or whatever, from any bus company with regard to the appeals?
No, I haven't. I mean, there is indication that buses would come through the site, but nothing more than that. And this, again, is the first time I've heard the names of any potential operators.
Okay. There's a draft planning obligation that is in discussion between the parties, and that's going to be discussed later in the inquiry. Now, one of its provisions as currently drafted, and we needn't turn it up for this purpose, but one of its provisions as currently drafted is the submission to the council of a sustainable public transport scheme prior to occupation of any of the dwellings for the council's approval. And that, we're told, is going to contain details of public transport services proposed to serve the development. That's what's currently suggested in the draft planning obligation. Do you consider that, if you like, relegating that detail to that point, so after consent has been granted, further down the line a scheme appears that sets out public transport provision, do you consider that to be a proper approach?
I don't consider it to be a comprehensive approach based on delivering the master plan objectives of moving people out of their private cars onto public transport and onto sustainable modes of transport. This is actually one of the fundamental things that underpins this as a vision in the master plan, and it's a vision that I support. I think it's a great vision, but it needs to be delivered up front. If it's to be, I think believe's too strong, but if it's to be significant enough confidence that it will be delivered, I don't see why these discussions haven't advanced to a greater extent already, and I'd be far more comfortable if they had, rather than leaving things too much to the end to be negotiated at a later date. Something that's so fundamental to the success of the scheme.
And then just finally, this in terms of these sorts of issues, if you go back to your proof, please, for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
We've already touched upon this in our discussion about buses. Paragraph 4.1.8 towards the foot of page 15.
Mm-hmm.
Where you talk about walking and cycling connections, you say that they are too also problematic as a result of the lack of a CBLR and the potential use of the lanes by more vehicles, as you've already discussed. You refer to positive aspects with links beyond the red line, new connections to the north into Kingsfold. But then you have a reservation about active travellers, i.e. those on foot, bicycle, the odd person on a horse, I guess, going over the B-lane bridge. Now, again, it's a matter that Mr. Stevens has commented on, but is there anything that you want to say from a urban design perspective about the shared use of B Lane Bridge as proposed?
Without going into the safety things, like as you correctly say, will be down to Mr. Stevens. There are concerns over that bridge in its current, state. It doesn't have any footways at all, and is narrow and quite daunting. And if you're trying to encourage connections beyond to the Causey, and I think, forgive me, it's called Old Tram Road, the car-free route into Preston, to have a sort of pinch point such as B Lane Bridge is going to dissuade people from making those journeys, and I would suggest, in a way undermines some of the objectives and the vision of the master plan.
The next point, please, that I want to take up briefly is that with regard to phasing. Now, we go back to the master plan for a moment. CD 1.16. Find within it page 37, there should be a section headed 10.0 development phasing.
Yeah, thank you.
So that will be page 37 on the PDF version. So. Do you have that, Dr. Price?
I do.
There's a figure showing the wider site with some coloured blocks described in the key to the left, and then there's some text to the left of that. Do you see the text?
I do.
And it tells us, I'm looking at the second paragraph on the page, that the indicative phasing plan for the site envisages 9 phases. The indicative phasing plan does not identify the sequence of the delivery of these phases, and it's proposed that phases will be promoted for residential-led development at the planning application stage. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And then the next paragraph tells us that each reserved matters application will be required to provide an indicative phasing plan for development proposed by that planning application. In terms of the level of information provided within the master plan on phasing, how would you describe the adequacy or otherwise of that?
Within the master plan, I think it's not really a phasing plan, isn't it? It doesn't give any indication of when each phase will come forward. It's merely a separation of the site into different parcels. And it does say that in the text. It doesn't pretend to be anything more than that. I mean, it has evolved, again, over the course of the appeal. And largely, I think it's evolved in the right direction. I'm pleased to see the road and the public open space coming in early. I was part of a group at CABE who did some work on a document called Start with a Park many years ago, and it's a really good thing to stick to in development terms, and I'm glad to see the public open space coming forward. I am slightly concerned that with one element of reservation on what has emerged is the local centre, which is indicated in the latest. Sorry, I need to refer to.
Before we
I'm jumping the gun.
Before we get to your comments on what has emerged, let's identify where it is. So we've seen what's said about phasing in the master plan.
Yes.
That has been supplemented in the run-up to the inquiry, and the latest iteration is to be found in Mr. Alsbury's evidence, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Appendix 2.
Yes, it is.
Where there's a document dated July 2022. It's a draft document headed Indicative Scheme Phasing and Implementation Plan. Appendix 2 to Mr. Alsbury's.
Yeah, just there. I do apologise. In the bid to try and not kill too many trees, I didn't print everything off. And I'm now struggling. What's the CD reference again, Ian? Could you?
1060.
1060. Ah,
Thank you very much.
it's just opening. Appendix 2.
Yeah.
It's a problem with touch screens. You touch it, it goes onto a different link. I do apologise, sir.
I'm now looking at it in paper form and electronic, but I've got too many copies of it in front of me.
You can never have too many copies.
So you've got that. Thank you very much. That's
It
helpful.
doesn't link through from the... Okay, carry on anyway. I have read it.
All right. The phasing, suggested phasing, and noting this is a draft and it's said for discussion with the council. There are 5 phases proposed for the development, and we can see that, for example, phase 2, which is to take place between broadly mid-26 to the end of 29, involves the delivery of about 410 homes. That's one of the components to be delivered, as well as components of infrastructure. Yeah.
Yes.
And then phase 3 starting mid-29, running through to mid-32, 2032. Again, infrastructure to be delivered, but including 426 homes. So that's over 800 houses of the up to 1100. And within phase 3 there is the delivery of a permanent local centre, including mobility hub, it says, before the end of phase 3. Now what's your view about the appropriateness of the timing of delivery of the local centre in
Well, my concern
accordance
would
with
be
that phasing plan?
Yeah, thank you for that. My concern would be the fact that there could be over 600 homes built before there's a local centre. And that issue is one that would lead, again, people to maybe resort to their cars in advance of a local shop and local facilities more readily. And then once that behaviour's become more set, then it becomes more difficult to convince people to act more locally. So I would have concern with the timing of that within, towards the end of phase 3. If it was to be brought in at the start of phase 3 or towards the end of phase 2, so that it would be there when houses were built, I think that would be more satisfactory.
Okay. All right. Just want to pick up a series of issues that you deal with in your proof of evidence, if you like, collectively. I hope without doing them any disservice. You refer to issues within the master plan that you say aren't addressed within to a sufficient level of detail. For example, the accommodation mix within each of the character areas is a point that you mention. Information on building heights that we've already referred to during the course of today. The relationship of new development with existing, and so on. Firstly, I just want to understand why you have recorded those concerns, which in effect are there's not enough detail in the master plan concerns. Why have you mentioned those?
Well, because with this comprehensive approach, it gives the opportunity for things to be set via the master plan and the design codes to help shape the whole development. And part of the idea behind having a master plan and a more comprehensive approach is that those things can be set at this stage, early in the process, and not left to the end. The reason set out in the National Design Code, in paragraph 9 of that, it says that design codes are important because they provide a framework for creating a healthy, safe, green, environmentally responsive, sustainable and distinctive places with a consistent high quality standard of design. This can provide greater certainty for communities about the design and development and bring conversations about design to the start of the planning process rather than the end. And I agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment, and I agree that design codes can and should do that. And this one does to a certain extent, but it could go further. So that is my point, Mr. Ponter. It's that I do believe this goes a certain degree of the way, but it could go further in a number of ways. The point about accommodation mix, for example.
Sorry to interrupt, but before you continue, what was the paragraph you
Sorry,
were quoting there? Just
Yeah, sorry, it's National Model Design Code,
Yep.
paragraph 9.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I should have.
Sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's
You
fine.
can go on to
The issue around accommodation mix is that it's very vague, and when you're down to different character areas within the plan, they will have a different accommodation mix. You would expect them to have a different accommodation mix. You'd expect more, say, smaller properties to be located in one part of the master plan area and more larger family homes in another part for good urban design reasons, and I expect that is what will happen. But through the reserve matters process, where it can be set, this sort of level of detail can be set through coding without going too far as to be prescriptive and to affect the individual designs coming forward at reserve matters. Similarly with the tenure mix, there could be a statement that it all should be tenure blind and pepper potted. I see no reference to that at all in the document. It's something that is required in policy in a number of places, and I do believe it's good urban design practice and it's something that should be sought. With regards the building heights issue, and I need to be open here, this is an area where my professional opinion, as it says in my proof, and this will no doubt come out in questioning, it differs from that of the council's view. And I think that with good urban design reasons, you could build slightly higher in some places to create feature buildings and at the end of rows or in key locations. And the limitation down to 2 is restrictive, overly restrictive in some cases. So, that's why I've taken issue at some points in the master plan. I do believe that the building heights plan as shown simply shows a broad band around existing properties and is very basic in its approach, when that could be looked at in more detail, going through each individual character area as to where within that character area the taller buildings might be appropriate and where they may not be. So I think it's a lack of detail in that regard.
In terms of those points where you say there's a lack of detail, and I've listed them, those that appear in your proof, the accommodation mix, height, building heights, and relationship of new development with existing, and way in which, I think another one was way in which local context has influenced design decisions. Is it your position that any of those criticisms that you've made of the level of detail, if you like, prevent the grant of consent at this stage?
Well, no, it's not, in a word, and that is, because they can technically be dealt with at reserve matters. And, there's no getting away from that. But it does indicate that the sort of comprehensive approach, the approach to creating, a place via a master plan and a design code hasn't been taken on board fully, and that's regrettable.
There's one aspect of your criticism in respect of level of information that I did want to note in particular, and that's page 28 of your proof concerning parking. Cycle and car parking. Just let's be clear, what information is contained within the master plan, or indeed the design and access statement, about a parking strategy for the development of the allocated site, including the appeal sites?
Well, as I quote in paragraph 4.10.4, it's in the design access statement, which is CD 1.17 on page 49, that parking throughout the development should be provided in accordance with relevant parking standards, it doesn't go much beyond that. It doesn't set out any potential ways that parking may be incorporated into each area. It doesn't talk about parking strategies in terms of whether that's frontage parking, side parking, parking courts, whether there's any reference at all to visitor parking and parallel parking on streets for visitors. So that is basically all it says on parking, that it will be dealt with at a later stage. Now, going back to what I said about design codes and the fact that you can bring these conversations forward in the process, it misses that opportunity. So, as I see it, what will happen, it will be lots of different discussions about parking coming forward at various reserved matters applications with different developers, different objectives. So that could have been avoided. It could have been made to work across the development as a whole, which was the whole idea behind having a master plan and a design code. And you can incorporate in character areas, specifically in the character area bits, different ideas about how parking in that particular character area might differ or might be delivered. Because I expect that the Penwortham Way edge zone will have a different solution to that around the hub, for instance. It will have perhaps more parking to the side of homes and garages as it goes out towards the rural edge than it does in the more urban parts of the scheme. Now, I don't want to prejudge or design the scheme, that's not my role at all, but I'm sure that's probably what will happen. But the code could, and in my opinion, should have set that out at an earlier stage.
Okay. Then the last little point that I want to ask you about is a reference in Mr. Thornton's proof, where he notes, amongst other things, that an internal Homes England panel have conducted a review. If we turn up Mr. Thornton's proof at page 33, you'll see the reference.
Yeah.
Page 33 of 49 within Mr. Thornton's evidence. And at paragraph 92, he says that the master plan vision and scheme was presented to the Homes England Master Plan and Design Development Review panel back in June 2020 with a follow-up later that month. and I don't think we have a document from that body, but at paragraph 96 he tells us that the MDD team, the master plan and design development team, confirmed that the layout of the Pickerings Farm master plan demonstrates significant design features that align to good placemaking and transport planning design inclusive of, and then there's a list of 9 numbered sub-paragraphs. And so we take it that that's a record of that design panel's conclusions.
We have no choice but to take it
Yeah,
at that, because
well,
that's what we have. So
No reason to think
no
otherwise.
reason to think otherwise.
Do those conclusions address the concerns that you've identified with the master planning process that has happened in this case?
A number of them do. If I just go through very briefly through them individually. The road hierarchy, of course, as I mentioned before, is compromised by the way that these applications have come forward for Appeal A and Appeal B with the terminated spine road, as to a certain extent are the public rights of way and pedestrian permeability, for reasons we've already discussed. Yes, it does generally show well-defined perimeter blocks, and there is a linear public realm green space strategy, which, if the whole master plan were built out, I have no issue with. The appropriate vehicular points of access on point 5, again, this is in reference to the entire master plan, which includes the CBLR being connected at both east and west ends, and doesn't include its termination. So that, I don't think, is appropriate in terms of what we are dealing with here, which is application A and B. The mobility hub, again, might be compromised with the issues around buses and public transport that we've discussed, but in principle, delivered across the whole master plan, again, I can see where they've reached that conclusion. I don't know anything about the integration of digital and smart technology networks, and I would presume that that's something that can be delivered. And the other two, like I say, aside from third place working environments at the local centre to facilitate local working, again, there's a lack of detail as to how this will be delivered. But aside from that, I can see why they've reached those conclusions. But also, I don't know whether it's not churlish to point out that in-house reviews have a tendency to find in favour of an operation. An independent design review is a different beast altogether.
All right. Dr. Price, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Are we ready just to crack on with cross-examination on both sides, or do we need a few minutes break?
Fine.
Nope. Okay.
I'm going to follow Dr. Price's lead in one regard only, and that's to take my jacket off, if you'll forgive me, sir.
And if anyone else feels the need to, then just go ahead.
Mighty close in here.
It is
even
indeed,
windows
yes.
are
Yeah.
Probably my age, Dr. Price, but
I think it's notable that the two people around this end of the room not wearing ties are both the designers. It's always the case.
Absolutely.
Architects don't wear ties.
no, absolutely. Mr. Thornton tells me he doesn't actually possess a tie. Did I want him to go and buy one? And I said, no, I don't think so, really. So.
I'll bring one in for him.
You can bring one in for him, yeah. Bring one of your Disneyland ties in. Go down well. Right, good afternoon, Dr. Price.
Good afternoon.
Let's get all that sorted out first of all. Before I ask you the questions which I'd intended to ask you, I just want to ask you one question at the outset, because otherwise I'm going to forget about it, so by mistake. And that's this issue of building heights.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm utterly confused. I'm sure that's entirely my fault and certainly not yours. But you'll be aware that we received an email yesterday. I say you'll be aware. Are you aware? Forgive me. Are you aware that we received an email yesterday from the case officer, that's the council's case officer, in relation to building heights? And it's now, I think, been added as a core document.
Mm-hmm.
The inspector's seen it. Now, when you said earlier on in your evidence in chief that this was an area where you had some disagreement with the council, I'm showing your independence, I suppose, I'm not clear whether you mean disagreement with that email or disagreement with where the council were before they wrote the email, or what? So what are we disagreeing with?
Okay. I disagree with the limitation of 2 stories across the majority of the site. Yeah,
Right.
and that is just a professional judgment. I understand the council's position and their democratic role in establishing their position, and I do understand that they have to, reflect that.
And
I
just
sorry.
I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry. And is that's suggested in the email, isn't it? Let me just think. Limited to 2 stories in certain areas. So
Yeah.
you disagree with that? One
Yeah.
of the things said in the email.
As a blanket.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carry on. So that's a good start. Carry
Yeah,
on.
I genuinely believe that that enable designers to be able to design places effectively. Sometimes taller elements can work. So whereas I wouldn't expect it to be up to 3 stories, up to 2.5 stories as a blanket,
Sure.
to have that flexibility in the design to create feature buildings, to create terminations of vistas, and all the things that
Yeah.
architects and designers do to create nice places. And I think that it over limits.
Overly limits it. Okay. Well, I think we need to find a practical way ahead, to be honest, because, I mean, you're the witness giving evidence on this. I'd love to be unfair, but I really mustn't be unfair. So we received an email yesterday from the council saying this is the council's position. The council's witness is, as I understand it, questioning at least part of that position. And I just wondered whether we could move this forward outside the inquiry by perhaps the council looking again at the email just to see whether, because you won't be aware. I don't know. Did you copy your emails to the case officer at Pickerings? Swade, your questions for clarification, I think. Okay. Well, we are in the process of seeking clarification of the council's email because there are certain parts that we didn't quite understand. So I just wondered whether, and we'll copy that email when you send it, Mr. Aldersbury, we'll copy it to the PIN's case officer as well. Thank you. And I just wondered whether outside the inquiry we could just try and progress this.
Of course.
Because I particularly am interested obviously in how the witnesses' views impinge upon what we've been told is the council's position, because the witness is meant to be the council's witness and not a free-floating chap who's just turned up here for a chat, you know.
If I could, my understanding is that that email represented Dr. Price's and the council's position.
Right.
It does.
It's just told me
sorry.
otherwise.
If
Just told me otherwise.
If that's wrong, then it may be that email, proposed wording in the email, needs some amendment.
Yes.
But that was my understanding, that
Right.
Dr. Price and the council were ad idem on
Right.
that
Okay.
content.
Okay.
So can you
That's-
perhaps leave that with us?
Perhaps we could, because obviously you heard what
Park
the
it,
witness said.
yes.
So.
Right, absolutely.
Yes. Right. Because I think, just from our perspective, all that we'd like to know, as clear as possible, is what is the council's position. To be honest, I don't really mind what it is, as long as we can understand what it is, and we can then take I can then take proper instructions on it, and whether we agree or disagree, at least we can have a position on something which is clear. Good.
And just so that I'm quite clear, so that your intention will be to provide an email that addresses
Yes.
the council's position and
So-
Dr. Price's position.
You thought you'd
So
done
my
this.
understanding is that is what that does.
Yeah.
I understand that the appellants may have some queries
Yes,
about the
we do.
wording of that.
We do.
There's obviously going to be an exchange about that. I mean, it's intended that this be an addendum to the statement of common ground in some way. So it would be useful if we could get to a point of agreement
Common
on it.
ground.
In that process, I will check outside of the inquiry as to whether or not that is Dr. Price's view and the council's combined view. I thought it was.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we're in the course
Yeah,
of sending
yeah.
an email just asking some questions for clarification. I mean, just to be crystal clear, you will know, sir, obviously my own friend, but will fully be aware of the fact there is a heights parameter plan. So if one was to sort of think to oneself, well, perhaps some or all even of the council's points are good points, I'm not saying we think that, but perhaps some of it might be something that we could accept. We really need to see that mapped out on the parameters plan, on an amended version of the parameters plan, because the words, to be honest, I'm not going to rehearse for it now, but they're not as clear as perhaps they should be. So we're going to ask for it to be mapped out on the parameters plan so that we can, that's what we had, this is what the council's saying, we can take it from there. Yeah.
Well, we're happy to engage in that process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, lovely. Good,
And,
let's move on.
and in terms of
Sorry.
the discussion with Dr. Price, then
Nothing to do with
and,
me, so that's for the council to sort him out.
But if you have further questions,
Don't worry, sir.
no,
I'll be fine.
right.
I really just, to be honest, I just really would like to understand what's being said. I can ask Mr. Thornton. If we don't agree with it, I can ask Mr. Thornton to comment on it. We'll take it from
Okay,
there.
right.
I
That's
won't
fine.
be
That's
prejudiced,
fine.
sir. But thank you
Okay.
very much for
Right.
thinking of me in that way. Thank you, sir. Right, let's start where I wanted to start now, Dr. Price. Now that we've got that confusion even more confused. So now in your evidence, as you know, and we can just check so that there's no doubt about this, in your proof,
Yes.
your written proof at pages 3 and 4, so page 3 first of all, you indicate 1.7. The specific reason for views I'm addressing here is the same for both appeals, and you set it out at the top of page 4. And the reason for views you're specifically addressing is reason for views on number 5 in the list of 11.
Yes.
Yes. And that is the one that your proof addresses. Now, obviously, as you've explained very, very openly, obviously, in your proof, I mean, you came along after the reasons for refusal were issued.
That's true.
And you've told the inquiry today that when you had your initial discussions with the council, I think I'm capturing this properly, suggested to the council that something that you could do is an independent audit, if you like, or review of the master plan, etc. work. And one assumes the council agreed with that, and here you are. Is that a fair
It's a reasonable
reflection?
reflection.
Yeah.
Obviously it was in support of the reasons for refusal
Well, that's the
to
point.
see
Yeah.
and to look for deficiencies in the master plan.
To look for deficiencies. Okay, right. And that's just vis-a-vis reason for refusal number 5. I'll come to the other points later on, but just help me with this. Obviously, whatever else is the case, one thing's for certain sure, that when the council decided to turn our applications down for identical reasons, and in particular the self-same point about the master plan in both appeals, they didn't have the, if I can put it in this way, the benefit, we might not see it quite like that, but the benefit of your work, did they?
I hadn't been appointed at that point, so...
Exactly. So obviously that's right. What I've said to you is right. And I just want to understand really whether you know, to what extent what you've said to this inquiry is actually anything to do with the council's case as per the reasons that they turned us down. So can we just unscramble reason for refusal number 5? You've set it out in your proof, so if we just look at it together at the top of page 4, there's a reference to policy C1 of the local plan. I don't need to read that all out aloud. And then we come to the complaint, if you like, the objection, what it is the council doesn't find acceptable. And it said the master plan has not been formally agreed by South Ribble Council, and then it says the version submitted with the 2 applications doesn't meet the policy requirements. So that's the reason for refusal that you're dealing with, apparently. Now the first of those 2 limbs we needn't worry about, need we, Dr. Price, because it's been acknowledged very fairly by the council's advocate, Mr. Ponter, this morning, that in the event, should it be the case that the Secretary of State considers the master plan to be suitable, then that will constitute the agreement that's required in the relevant policy. And I take it you're not quarrelling with Mr. Ponter on that.
Absolutely not.
Good. That's you never. It's worth checking, but you know, that's good. And so that leaves the second bit of the reason for refusal that you're dealing with, and that is that the version, in other words, the master plan, which is found at core document 1.16, core document 1.16, the version submitted with the applications doesn't meet the policy requirements. And the policy that's referred to is obviously policy C1, because that's the policy that talks about the master plan for the Pickerings farm allocation, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good, okay. So if we look at the policy requirements, quote unquote, as a reason for refusal calls them, as in policy C1. Let's just look at them together. I can't remember whether you set out C1 in your proof to save us digging around. You do, actually you do, yes. So in your proof at page 8, you just help us picking up the core document online. At page 8, you set out the policy C1 for the inspector's note, should he wish to in due course. This is core document 5.2 is the local plan, and it's PDF page 31 is where you'll find that policy. So yep. PDF page 31. It's a different pagination in the original document. And we can see that we're told in policy C1, item A, there's been agreed master plan. For the comprehensive development of the site, the master plan must include the wider area of the Pickerings farm site, which includes the safeguarded land, which extends to Coot Lane, as shown on the map, and make provision for a range of land uses to include, and then the uses are listed as on a non-exclusive basis. So now our master plan meets the policy requirement to include the safeguarded land to Coot Lane, doesn't it? The master plan.
Yes, it does.
Thank you. And the master plan makes provision for a range of land uses, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yes. So in terms of the requirements of the policy, quote unquote, as the reason for refusal calls them, we've met both of them, haven't we?
In those 2 reasons, yes, but a master plan, of course, provides a lot more.
Well, forgive me, you see, this is where the reason we're here is because the council turned us down, refused our applications. And the reasons they turned us down are the inspectors got them, and one of them is the reason that you're defending and that I've read out to you. And it starts off by saying, well, not only starts off, it starts off and then completes by saying that the master plan doesn't meet the policy requirements, by which it means of policy C1. We've just agreed that the master plan does what C1 requires. So the reason for refusal is just plain wrong, isn't it, Mr. Dr. Price? The reason for refusal, I'm not talking about your evidence at the moment, I'm talking about the reason for refusal. It's plain wrong, because the 2 things the policy requires the master plan to do are the 2 things amongst others, that the master plan does. Do you agree?
I'd like to, obviously the policy point will be picked up by my colleague Mr. Wood later in the inquiry.
Right.
On the surface of what you say, nothing you say is not true.
Good.
However, I do contend that the master plan is not deliverable via the applications as they come forward, which is a different point. I do accept that.
That's that is the nub of the matter, because reason for refusal 5 that you're apparently defending, but to be quite frank, I don't think you are. Reason for refusal 5 is there's something wrong with the master plan. It doesn't do what policy C1 requires the master plan to do. But actually, I don't think you've got a particular problem with the master plan. Your problem is that applications A and B are not delivering themselves all of certain key elements of the master plan, for example, the link road. Is that a fair summation of the position?
I do have a number of issues with the master plan, as I've outlined, in terms of its lack of detail and depth and its lack of a comprehensive approach. But it's a fair summation that the biggest of those is to do with the lack of the east-west connection, CBLR, and that would relate to point B, surely, a phasing and infrastructure delivery schedule, in which a proper infrastructure is not created via these applications,
right?
Or at any point shown how it will be delivered. Sorry.
No, it's my fault entirely, and on that occasion I do mean that. I interrupted you inadvertently, I'm sorry. So forgive me. Yes, item B of policy C1 is indeed that there should be a phasing and infrastructure delivery schedule. Forgive me. That point is picked up in a different reason for refusal. It is, for example, we have reason for refusal number 6, where we're told that there's insufficient detail on how the site would be delivered and no detailed phasing plan nor programme of implementation. Okay. And I hadn't thought that you were the gentleman dealing with reason for refusal number 6. I thought that was the planning witness, I must admit, and to an extent, obviously the County Highway Authority dips its toes into those waters as well. But you see, your proof doesn't actually tell us anything about reason for refusal number 6. But are you now sort of is that now you and not the people who do talk about it?
I think there are implications on the delivery of the master plan relating to reason for refusal 6. So I do touch upon many of those things in my proof, as you rightly say.
No. Forgive me. Forgive me. No, what I've rightly said to you is I've drawn attention to that. You've told us in your proof you're addressing reason for refusal number 5, the one about the master plan. You don't claim in your proof anywhere to be addressing reason for refusal number 6, which is about the programme of implementation, the phasing plan, and how the site would be delivered. You don't tell us that you're dealing with condition number 7, which is an absence of a firm commitment apparently to deliver the whole of the link road, and so on and so forth. So I'm just trying to introduce some discipline to this, if you like, because I thought there was, Mr. Wood was dealing with these wider points. I thought Mr. Stevens was dealing with them, particularly as they relate to highways matters. I hadn't realised that you think that you're dealing with them. But if you are, fair enough. If you're now the witness on the subject, then let's have a go. But are you?
Mr. Wood and Mr. Stevens will deal with them in more detail.
Right.
However, there are implications to the wider placemaking, master planning agenda to those points, and perhaps I should have included reason for refusal 6 as being a witness for part of that.
Okay, all right. Do you have reason for refusal number 6? Do you even know what it says before you
directly? I have
before you
previously
services.
But perhaps I should have a word with Mr. Ponter. Would that be a reasonable thing?
No,
you can't.
I can't do that, can I? No, I know I can't.
It's core document 8.3 if you want to look at it electronically.
Okay.
And it's only a couple of sheets of paper, so it should only take a nanosecond to load, I hope. Yeah.
Okay.
You've got it now. So number 6, as you'll see, starts off by referring to the self-same policy C1 that we're all familiar with now, I hope. And its complaint, its objection, is the submitted documentation provides insufficient detail on how the site will be delivered. Remember that this is a reason for refusal which is said in each of the 2 site applications. So insufficient detail on how the site will be delivered, and no detailed phasing plan has been submitted, and no programme of implementation has been agreed. So are you now taking that one under your wing as well?
Only really the implications of that one,
Right.
with
Okay.
with due respect, but in the respect that the 2 master plans coming forward for sites A and site B, as opposed to the overarching master plan, are very different in terms of how they operate than the overarching master plan. Now, as we've established already, the overarching master plan with its connected road
Yes.
operates very differently to the 2 cul-de-sac schemes.
That's where I.
Of
That's
A and
where
B.
that's why I effectively started with this, because there aren't 3 master plans in front of the inspector. Heaven help the poor inspector. There's 1 master plan for the whole allocation and indeed the safeguarded land. There is then a design and access statement, and various points are put forward in that in relation to application A and or appeal application A and appeal application B. There aren't 3 master plans floating around. So just forgive me. You see, that again tells me that you're really the nub of your complaint, so to speak, or your objection isn't the master plan itself, which certainly covers the entirety of the allocation and the safeguarded land and has all these uses that the policy wants, etc., etc. But it's actually, it seems to me, your point is it's A and B. A and B isn't the whole lot. A and B isn't A to Z, if you like. It's not the whole site. It's not a whole allocated site. I think is actually the nub of your complaint.
I would agree with that. Yes.
Okay, right, good, fine, that's what I thought. Now then, the issue with that is that I put to you is that there isn't any policy requirement for there to be a single planning application across the site where even our bits are in 30 ownerships. Heavens knows how many other ownerships there are on the rest of the site. And there's no policy, is there, that requires a single planning application to be brought forward for the comprehensive development of the entire allocated site in one go.
No, there isn't.
No. And the point of having a master plan is, were you here when I made my opening this morning?
I was.
Good. And you'll remember, we need to try and dig it up. I'll just read it out to you. I said in my paragraph 10 of my opening, it seems obvious that the underlying purpose of requiring a master plan is to ensure that as and when planning applications are made for the development of parts of the allocated site, there is an overall strategy for the wider area which individual applications should be consistent with, so that the individual parts facilitate rather than inhibit or preclude bringing forward the greater whole. Is that a fair summation of what the master plan's purpose is?
It is indeed, yeah.
Good.
I have no issue with that.
Thank you very much indeed. Right. Fine, thank you for that. Let's press on, if I may. Now, you have, if I can just pick up this point that you've sort of added to your list, if you like, of the phasing and implementation plan. You went to it in Mr. Strawsbury's proof, appendix number 2. You went to in chief. So, can we just retrieve that, please? Strawsbury's appendix number 2 in his proof. The inspector's using it electronically.
Yeah, I've got it.
And I'm going to really struggle to help you properly with that. But
I have that on the
you've got
screen,
it.
so
Oh,
yes.
marvellous.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And you'll recall that you made a point. Sorry, tell me when you've got it. I'm so sorry, Mr. Dr. Price. My fault.
Now appendix 2. Yeah, yes. No, I don't.
Inspector's got it. So yes, that's
Yes, I have it in front of me.
Thank you very much indeed. And you'll remember that in your evidence in chief, you went to this document, and remember that this is a document which is meant to be the phasing and infrastructure delivery schedule and a programme of implementation for applications A and B. That's what it's meant to be. and it's put forward as a draft, and you indicate for discussion, and you indicated in your evidence in chief that you singled out the point about the provision of the local centre. You'll remember making that point. That's where we have the local centre to be delivered. It's the bottom of the pages aren't paginated in the original document. It's probably easy to use the PDF here, but it's in phase 3. Yes. At the bottom of the page that deals with phase 3, we have deliver permanent local centre before the end of phase 3. And you said, well, you think that's a bit too late, really. You'd like it either at the end of phase 2 or the beginning of phase 3. And that's because, I think, just so we can flush the point out, phase 2 is 410 homes and phase 3 is 426. And so read literally, if we did literally wait to the end of phase 3, one might have 836 homes before one has a local centre. That's your point.
That is the point, yes.
And it should be earlier. So that's, if I might say, a constructive suggestion on your part. Now, you won't be aware, I don't think, of the discussions on the Section 106.
No, I've not been involved in those.
No. Well, there are discussions on the Section 106. First of all, that there should be an interim local centre. The detail of whatever that means will be in the Section 106 discussions before the 50th occupation, and the full local centre at the moment we've put forward before the 625th occupation. I don't know what the magic of these numbers is, but before the 625th. Now, I don't know whether you'll be at all involved in advising the Council on these discussions, but obviously these are discussions which are going on outside the inquiry, and hopefully we'll reach a resolved position about when the local centre is to be provided. But basically you want it earlier than 836, and to be quite honest, so do we, because we've suggested it should be earlier than that.
In which case, that is
progress.
Progress.
Good.
Yes, I think that's
Excellent.
good.
All right, so that's happy. That sounds pretty. You know, I'm a cheerful chap, so that sounds happy. You didn't mention anything else about Mr. Alsbury's appendix number 2, and basically, I apart from the road, which I think is for some, particularly for Mr. Stevens, but are there any other? I'm not inviting there to be any. You didn't mention any other. Are there any other issues? I mean, you actually commended the early delivery of the green infrastructure, etc., etc. You thought that was good. So I'm taking it there aren't any other things that jump off the page to you as being...
No, there are no other things.
No other
major concerns.
Right. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Grand. So then I want to move on to your review of the master plan, which you conduct in your proof, and you begin this review in your proof at page 12, section 4, master plan and design code assessment. And we've looked at the reason for refusal of the master plan. You'll be aware, Dr. Price, there isn't a reason for refusal which criticises a design code. You're aware of that, aren't you?
I'm aware of that.
Yeah, okay. So now what you've then done is you have, if we just look at your paragraph 4.01 on page 12, you have, if you like, audited the master plan as against the 12 objectives in the Building for a Healthy Life document, which is core document 10. You say it's 10.17, it's actually 10.22, I think.
I do apologise, it may have changed.
No, don't worry, I suspect it has. I suspect some...
I also apologise.
Stuck in an extra 5 core documents or something to throw the numbering out. But so I wonder if you can get that document open, please. It might take a bit of time to load, but I'm afraid we're going to have to do it. As far as I'm aware, it's core document 10.22.
I'll have that
That's
out.
it. Excellent. The inspector has come unplugged or whatever, sir. Or you
No. I'm just trying to bring it closer to me. My eyesight doesn't,
I know the
doesn't
feeling.
deal with it
I
very
know the
well.
feeling. I can see a picture of some houses, but after that, it's all a bit of a blur. It's my kind of master plan. So, Dr. Price, just help me with this, please. Can I just ask a really sort of basic question? When in your section 4 you say you've reviewed the master plan and design code as against these objectives, do you mean the master plan, or do you mean the DAS, design and access statement, forgive me, for the two applications? Because the master plan is for the whole allocated site and the safeguarded land, whereas RMP rules are for a large chunk and a smaller chunk within that overall mass and that overall master plan. So I'm sorry to ask you such a basic question, but what are you actually reviewing here? Because it looked to me like a lot of your comments were actually about the planning appeal applications rather than the master plan itself.
It is both, and I've indicated as and when.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
it relates to the difficulties and the issues around A and B.
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see whether we can get along on that basis. Now, in your proof on page 12 of your proof, you say in your paragraph 4.0.1 that the fourth line, that the use of Building for a Healthy Life, BHL, and its predecessor Building for Life is, and it's your word, embedded in the core strategy and throughout the design guide. Now, obviously, Building for a Healthy Life was issued some years after those two documents that you've referred to. And as you rightly say, Building for a Healthy Life has quite deliberately stepped away from some of the approaches in the earlier documents, hasn't it?
It has.
And so whatever is embedded, and I'm going to challenge you about that in due course, but whatever is or isn't embedded in the development plan and indeed an SPD, whatever is or isn't embedded, one thing's for certain sure, it isn't Building for a Healthy Life, because it post-dates these documents.
I do say its predecessor Building for Life, which
No, you
doesn't.
say and. Sorry to be a lawyer for once in my life. You say and. So the use of Building for a Healthy Life, you say and its predecessor, is embedded.
Okay.
And that is, sorry, it might sound picky, but there's a reason for the question, and it's not just to be picky. Building for a Healthy Life does not feature, does it, at all, in the development plan, by which I mean the core strategy, or indeed the later local plan. It certainly doesn't feature as a way of auditing the master plan that's required for the Pickerings farm allocation, nor does it feature at all in the design guide, which is at the SPD, for the simple reason that all of those three documents predate by some years Building for a Healthy Life.
That is true.
Yes.
It's the use of the word and I apologise for that.
Well, it's the use of the word
Confusion.
and the use of BHL. Those are the words, the offending words, because Building for a Healthy Life has got nothing to do with the development plan or the SPD.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
It should have been, sorry, with permission, it should have been the use of Building for a Healthy Life's predecessor, Building
Yes.
for Life.
Exactly. Okay. No, that's fine.
I can see
That's
that.
fine. And you say embedded, and you say you've got two references for that. One is policy. You say 17. I think it might be G17, but policy 17 of the core strategy. Now, the core strategy is core document. Where's it gone? Don't know so whether that's one that you had open or not.
No, it depends what you're referring
It's
to.
in.
Well, it's,
Can I just say it's also in my proof?
Oh, okay.
Point
Well
2.6
well done. What
on page
is that?
7.
Page 7. You might save us.
Oh, sorry, it's actually on page 8, but the point starts on page 7.
Sure. No, well done. Thank you so much. That saved us an awful lot.
It's
find the
it's
blessed thing.
subsection L.
Yes. So it's policy. Yes, it is policy 17. Forgive me. I don't know where I got G from. Policy 17. Policy 17 in the core strategy, and you set it all out there. And I mean, the extent of the reference to the predecessor document, not the actual current document, is the beginning of the policy says the design of new buildings, the design of new buildings. So we remember this is an outline application. The design of new buildings will be expected to take account of the character and appearance of the local area, including the following. So one of the things that one's to take account of is all the way through at item L for lovely, right towards the end of the policy, which is achieving building for life. That was the, I think, 2 editions before the current edition. Building for life rating of silver or gold for new residential developments. Now, the silver and gold doesn't exist anymore, does it?
No, it doesn't.
No. And so, and that's it from the course. This embedded point is that single reference to something which no longer exists. I don't know whether that's fairly described as embedded, but whatever it is, it's gone anyway. Do you see?
I do.
Yes, thank you. And the SPD that you refer to, I mean, we needn't turn it up unless you want to help answer the point. But the SPD is 2012.
Yep.
It predates both limbs of the development plan. It's core document 6.4, and it doesn't say anything about auditing as against the then version of the document, which has gone anyway. I mean, it doesn't actually say that, for example, a master plan needs to be audited by reference to whatever the standard was then, the guidance was then, does it?
No, it doesn't.
No.
I was just using the Building for Life framework, as I explained
Sure.
in my evidence in chief, as a
Sure.
guide to assess
Yes.
the master plan. I wasn't intending to carry out an audit or a survey and check points
Yeah. No, it's
off.
just-
It was just literally as a tool by which to unlock some of the
Yeah.
issues.
But the innocent reader or the reader who hasn't perhaps read all the background documents of your proof would have thought from your proof that the development plan and the SPD requires something to be done, and as we've seen, it doesn't. Instead, what's happened is you've taken Building for a Healthy Life as a convenient framework, if you like, within which to talk about the master plan and or the DAS, depending on which part of your proof it is. That's what's happened, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So let's just look at whether that's something which really stands up, if you like, in the way in which you've done it. And for this, we need Building for a Healthy Life, which is core document 10.22. And we just need to go to the 12 considerations first of all, just to get our bearings. And they appear in the PDF there at page 2 of 47. My own friend has got a hard copy, I think.
I'm so sorry.
No, you haven't, don't worry.
I was looking at a different document.
That's fine. This is core document 10.22, Building for a Healthy Life.
Yeah, I've got it electronically.
Great,
thank you.
okay, so we're going to start at page 2 of 47. You don't
Thank you.
need to follow along if you don't want to. And on that page, we can see that the 12 considerations are on the right-hand side of that electronic page, do you see? And they are the 4 things under each of there's a green, there's an orange, and there's a blue heading, do you see? And we've got various words for each of those 12 objectives, yep?
Yes.
Okay, so those are the objectives, those are the considerations I give you. They're not objectives any longer, they're considerations. Those are the considerations. And if we look in this document for what's meant to happen if one does a Building for a Healthy Life assessment or analysis or whatever, if we look at how they're meant to work, I wonder if you could go, please, in the document to, and it's PDF page, forgive me, I just want to give you the right reference. My machine is running away with me. Just want to make sure I give the inspector the right PDF reference, sorry, so I don't confuse everybody, including myself. So, PDF page 5, original document pages 8 and 9, under the heading of Achieving the Best Outcome. So, once you've got that page, perhaps you can just say to me that you've got it. Yeah, okay. You've got it there, Dr. Price. I can see the inspector has. Great. So, we're told under Achieving the Best Outcome, Building for a Healthy Life is foremost a design process structure, not a scoring system. For this reason, we list and illustrate examples of good practice highlighted by a green light. Poor practice is highlighted with a red light. Where an element of design is considered to fall between a green and a red, then there's an amber, etc., etc. And then we're told the more green lights, a proposed development secures, the better it would be. Then it's the last two paragraphs on that page which intrigued me. Building for a Healthy Life offers a process for collaborative working between developers, local authorities, communities and other stakeholders by providing principles for creating better places and focusing attention on them. Successful placemaking comes from talking, discussing and exploring ideas, workshops, drawing and modelling. The best way to use Building for a Healthy Life is to use the 12 considerations as a starting point, and for those involved to agree what is needed to secure a green light against each consideration, etc. Now, let's just pause. Dr. Price, the first time the Council has mentioned Building for a Healthy Life vis-a-vis these planning appeals, applications, is in your evidence, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
But as I explained, I was just using the headings as a means to unlock
No, but it's whether
the issues.
that's a legitimate thing to do, given that the process is meant to begin with a discussion where the local authorities engage, saying, with the local authorities discussing with us, saying, well, look, for each of these 12 considerations for these applications, in order to get a green light for, I don't know, connections, natural connections, which is the first of the 12, we would anticipate whatever it might be. We would have discussed that with the council, and hopefully there would have been some resolved agreement that to get a green light one would need to have X, whatever X might be. The difficulty we've got here is that none of that's happened because the council doesn't give a hoot about Building for a Healthy Life. They've never mentioned it to us before. So that process hasn't been followed. So we haven't got any indication from the council as to what it considers would be necessary just to begin the discussion with us to secure a green light, which is good, against each of the 12 considerations. Now that's right, isn't it? We haven't got anything from the council to begin the ball rolling on this is what we think you'd need. What do you think of this idea? This is what we think you'd need to get a green light for this consideration, that consideration, and some other consideration. We haven't got that, have we?
No, but with respect, and I'm not a lawyer, it does say the best way to use BHL is to use it that way. It doesn't say it's the only way to use it as a collaborative tool. It can be used for a number of things, and I am just using it as a series of headings. I could have very easily changed the headings and not referred to Building for a Healthy Life.
Yeah, well,
I just thought it was a good way to structure it under a series of headings that people understand, and has been, I'll use the word embedded here properly, I expect, in the profession for a number of years. People, practitioners, do understand it, and that's shown by the fact that an internal self-marked Building for a Healthy Life assessment is actually been carried out by Mr. Thornton.
Yeah, and it's never been criticised. You know, I haven't had anything from the council saying the problem with your master plan is, you know, Homes England's independent internal audit has shown, as far as they're concerned, that, you know, this fares well under the Building for a Healthy Life considerations. We, the council, think differently. We've never had that stage. The first time we've heard anything about this whole subject is with your evidence. It's certainly nothing to do with the reasons for refusal. Reasons for refusal don't say the problem with the master plan is it, or the DAS. DAS is even mentioned, by the way. The problem with the master plan or the DAS or something else is it doesn't fare well in relation to Building for a Healthy Life. You know, that's never been mentioned before.
But
do you see the problem?
I do see the issue, but the master plan, the reasons for refusal do mention the master plan, a comprehensive approach and design code, and it
doesn't mention it. There's no objection to the design code and the reasons for refusal.
But the policy C1,
the reason for refusal recites C1, and it then says, we've done all this right at the beginning of the cross-examination, it then says you don't meet the policy requirements under C1, and we've agreed that we do, because the policy requirements are simply to have the allocated site and the safeguarded land, and to have a full range of uses, and we've agreed that the master plan does all of that. So don't try and bring this back to the reason for refusal. This has nothing to do with the reason for refusal, Dr. Price. This is you, not the reason for refusal. So can we just carry on? You said to me, well, you're not a lawyer, and so the document says the best way is to use it. But the whole process is meant to be collaborative. So even if one doesn't use it in the way in which we're told at the bottom of page 8, it's still meant to be a collaborative process, isn't it?
It is intended to be a collaborative process, I agree.
Thank you. And there's no collaboration here, is there? Because the council has never sought to engage with us on this document in a collaborative way. We can't collaborate with you as a, and I don't mean this offensively, but as a hostile witness asking for the applications to be refused. I mean, that's not collaboration.
No.
Collaboration, thank you. Collaboration would have been some stage, somewhere along the line, where somebody from the council would have said, well, Building for a Healthier Life, you know, we've got Dr. Price, we've engaged Dr. Price and he's mentioned this document to us. Can we talk to you about that? But that hasn't happened, you see. Anyway, let's move on. When we then look at your proof, the first one of the considerations that you talk about is natural connections. That's at the bottom of your page 12. And you make various points on pages 12 through to, I think this is your longest section, through to page 16 actually. And I wonder therefore whether we can actually look at what the natural connections part of the Building for a Healthy Life actually says. And that is found at PDF, where's it gone? It's quite a way on, there's quite a lot.
9.
Yeah, 9 is it? Thank you so much, Dr. Price.
Actually, 8, 9 and 10.
Yes, yes, so thank you. So if we look at page 8, PDF page 8, so that's original pages 14 and 15. Natural connections is the consideration on the right hand side of the page. And then we find that there's an expression, create places that are well integrated into the site and their wider natural and built surroundings. Avoid creating isolated, disconnected places, not easy places to move through and around. What's needed and various things are said to be needed. And then we find some indications of what green looks like on original page 17, PDF page 9, what green looks like, and on the next page we've got what red looks like. So for a newcomer to this document, and I don't know whether the inspector's ever used this document before, but for a newcomer to the document, that gives you some understanding as to how it works, you know, some overarching ideas. Here's some clues as to what looks good, and here's some clues as to what looks bad. Now, I don't see in your proof for natural connections anywhere where you actually take the items which are set out as an explanation of natural connections on page 8 in the PDF and the greens on the next page and the reds on the page after that. I don't see anywhere where you actually pick up the points that are said to be good ideas and the things that are said to be bad ideas. I don't see anywhere where you actually take what the document actually says and apply it to either the master plan or the DAS. What you've done instead is to use the heading natural connections and talk about the applications. What you haven't done is to say Building for a Healthy Life says X. The problem with your application A or B is it doesn't do X, it does something else. Do you see what I mean?
I do, but that's
Is
simply
that right?
that is correct, and it's because I didn't set out to complete a full Building for a Healthy Life assessment. And even if you do, and I've completed dozens, if not hundreds of them, you don't follow every heading, every positive thing and every negative thing. You use those sorts of headings to reach a judgment upon natural connections. Yeah. So, for instance, the first point, edge-to-edge connectivity, is quite clearly one of the major issues that I and others have with this application, in that the applications do not create east-to-west connectivity because they terminate that connectivity in the middle. And there are other points, again, which are touched upon in different ways. So I think that that's...
yeah, okay, all right.
I didn't intend to go down every point,
Well, that's what I'm just trying to get to grips, because you say, look, I'm Dr. Price using this document to, in effect, audit the master plan, although I think really you're auditing the individual applications more than the master plan per se. But anyway, you say you use it to audit them, and I'm just pointing out, and I've done it for natural connections, if I repeated the question for each of the 12, I'd get the same answer, wouldn't I? That you haven't taken, thank you, you haven't taken what the document says for each and therefore any of the 12 and applied them in terms to what's before the inspector. you use them more as headings for discussions for your discussion rather than an audit against what's said in the document itself.
That is absolutely true,
Good.
because the headings and the points made under what green looks like and what red looks like are not meant to be a checklist. It's a list of things that might be positive schemes might look like or poor schemes may look like.
Yes, but if one's going to say, well, I'm going to use this document, and this document says this is what we think good looks like, and this is what we think bad looks like, and this is what we're aspiring to. If one's going to use the document, one might expect some discussion of what the document actually says is good on the one hand and what the document says is bad on the other, to see how one fares. And that's not what you've done, as we've seen now 4 times over.
As I said before, I've
Good.
done many of these. I
Sure,
was an accredited assessor for the predecessor, and benchmarked the system.
Correct.
And it's not the way that we train people to use it. It's not the way that it was intended to be used as a simple checklist of going down every point. It's merely to highlight some of the likely issues.
Yes, but forgive me, even I know you regard it as being looser than my reading of the document, and I've already shown you that part of it, and you've said, well, that's not the only way it can be done, but does state in terms that the best way to use the document is to use the considerations as a starting point for all of those in agree to agree what is needed to secure a green light against each consideration. So certainly the document imagines its green lights are going to be used, doesn't it?
In some cases, yes, I agree.
Okay, well, I don't know whether there's some magic in some cases. It says to secure a green light against against a particular consideration. Okay, this is your point, that you might have a perfectly acceptable overall plan that gets some greens and some ambers and some reds.
Absolutely.
Fine. Okay, even better.
But no reds, actually. For an acceptable plan, it shouldn't have any reds. There should be some ambers and greens.
Oh, right. Okay, so it doesn't have to have green throughout the 12. It could have a mix of some greens and some
That's
ambers.
correct.
Got it. That's fine. All right. Thank you very much indeed. All right. Well, I've tried my best to explore what you have and haven't done vis-a-vis the document itself. Now, can I understand this? Are you remembering that? Let's unscramble this. Let's start with the master plan. The master plan, which is for the entire allocation and indeed the safeguarded land. Are you saying that there's anything in the master plan which would preclude the achievement of a satisfactory outcome from a Building for a Healthy Life assessment?
Not that would preclude. There are aspects of the master plan which need more detail to ensure that a green could be attained. And I refer particularly to the use of the lanes and the issues that we discussed briefly during my evidence in chief.
You see, this is where I'm afraid this is where again I'm sure it's me, not you, Dr. Price, but when I say the master plan, I mean the master plan, a
Yes.
separate document for the entire allocation. It's got nothing to do with the use of the lanes, because that's the one that's got the CBLR crossing the master plan has the CBLR across the whole allocation from west to east. So, with the CBR in, that apparently is the magic answer to all these problems that, people are identifying. So in the master plan, you've got that connection. The applications don't build the entire link road, because the application's for 2/3 the overall allocation, not all of it. So, forgive me, can we just come back to the master plan itself? Not...
I was talking about the master plan, sorry to interrupt.
Okay, right, the use of the lanes in the master plan.
The master plan actually does discuss the restricted use of the lanes to existing properties.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whilst I admit that with the CBLR, with the link road crossing, the temptation for people to use the lanes
Right.
would be reduced. They would take the obvious route.
Yes.
Significantly, there still remains the potential for people to
Okay.
use the lanes without that, the more detail, as we talked about with reference to the small plan in the master plan about
That's
restricting
helpful.
use and all of that.
That's a helpful point, Dr. Price. And so, therefore, what I take from that is that this point about the use of the lanes by people driving cars, because obviously people walking on the lanes and cycling and riding, that's all great. But people in their cars on the lanes, if they are anything to do with the new homes on the allocated site, I mean, one would want to deter people from the new development
Absolutely.
using the lanes by car. by vehicle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And so in other words, from what you've said, this isn't an issue just about our appeal applications, it's actually an issue which goes to the allocation itself, because the allocation includes all of the lanes.
Yes.
And if one's to build 1350, and remember that's just an indicative number, it could be a lot more, but if one's to build 1350 homes on the allocated sites, one's going to have to sort these lanes out anyway, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so good, now that's very interesting. So there will have to be, for the site to have been allocated in the first place, there must be an answer, mustn't there?
You would expect so.
Yes, because otherwise it shouldn't have been allocated in the first place. So there must be some answer to this issue, and we've put forward several answers. We wait to see what the council has to say about that. There's a matter of detail as to if they've got any other brighter ideas and better ideas than the ones we put forward. But there's got to be an answer out there somewhere, hasn't there?
Yeah, again, you'd expect so.
Okay, good. And if there's an answer for the allocated site, there must be an answer for A and B as well, because it would be the same answer. If you're trying to stop vehicles from people in new homes getting onto the lanes, because the CBLR isn't going to make any difference to your desire to want to stop people from the new development using the lanes. We've just established that.
I would just suggest that the CBLR would reduce the chances of instances of people wanting to use the lanes.
But not eradicated.
But potentially not eradicated.
Exactly, so that's why we agreed a few minutes ago. This issue arises with the allocation itself. And my point to you is that as there must be an answer to this, otherwise the site wouldn't have been allocated, as there must be an answer to it, the self-same answer would apply when one's bringing forward elements of the overall allocation. We're bringing forward A and B. It would be the same answer, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Yeah, good, okay, fine, thank you very much indeed. That's helpful. Right, and then, good, that's very helpful. I just want to move on now. You referred in your written evidence and in your oral evidence to the what you call the self-assessment by Homes England's audit team, if you like, of the master planners against building for a healthy life. Do you remember referring to it?
I do.
You refer to it in your proof, and you were taken by my learned friend to where Mr. Thornton sets out the conclusions of that process. By self-assessment, I mean, as he explains, it's an independent team within Home England. You understand that Homes England
I do indeed.
Are actually the co-sponsors of Building for a Healthy Life. I mean, it is to an extent their document,
I do indeed.
which they use. If people are bidding to them, they use it to say, well, this bidder gets more points, if you like, or gets more favour from us because what they're proposing fares well under Building for a Healthy Life. So it's one of my clients, one of the appellant's own documents, isn't it?
Sure, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So no intonation of biased was meant to be.
No, there was no. Other than the fact that an independent assessment is generally a different thing to people that have an interest in the scheme. You mentioned it's your own clients. Co-sponsors of the scheme, and they're assessing their scheme against it.
No.
I'm not implying any bias.
Right.
Just a recognition that it's not an independent assessment.
Well, forgive me. It's an independent team whose job, as I understand it, as explained by Mr. Thornton, is to look at propositions that are put forward, and here it is a proposition for at least some land that Homes England has an interest in, and to independently review whether what's being put forward, fares well or poorly in relation to Building for a Healthy Life. I mean, that's the whole point of the team, as I understand it.
Yeah, I accept that.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you very much. Right, fine. Now, I'm not going to get involved in a sort of scrap with you about whether you've correctly understood our ideas for inhibiting people from the new development using the lanes, whether you've correctly understood our bus proposals, whether you've correctly understood, Section 106 and what we want to do with B-Lane Bridge. That's all explained and will largely be dealt with by the highways witnesses, to be honest. But what I do want to understand is this. We've seen that your point about the CBLR and its entire length not being delivered by applications A and B, we heard an explanation from you in your evidence in chief that gives rise to two particular issues from your perspective. One, the use of the lanes, do you remember?
Yes.
Which we've already discussed, so we won't go back to that. And secondly, the bus loop, and whether you correctly understood our bus ideas or not, and the section 106 on that, I'll leave. It doesn't matter, because we're going to look at that in great detail later on in the inquiry. But just help me with this. The delivery of the entirety of the CBLR, Central Cross-Borough Link Road, is not in the control of the appellants, is it? We can deliver nearly all of it, but we can't deliver just over 100 metres in the in-between land.
Obviously, you can't if you don't have the ownership, but
Yes.
there is.
Right.
I mean, there is an argument to be made, I think, during probably other people's evidence over whether or not the master plan and the policy does require the delivery of that cross-borough link road. It's not for me to
No, well,
not for me to get involved in policy arguments.
I've already put my marker down that it doesn't, but I mean that's for A and others, and you've quite. I don't blame you, Dr. Price. You've stepped out of that debate. But basically, if it isn't required by a policy, then there isn't a policy basis for it.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
in terms of placemaking,
Yeah.
if it isn't required, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, it certainly should be.
Okay, all right. So, and we can pick up with others whether it is required or not, whether it's necessary and all the stuff that needs to be applied when the inspector writes his report. But in any event, just help me with this. So even if you're right, and we don't accept this for one moment, but even if you had a point that the delivering the whole of the central cross-borough link, I'm going to get this wrong every time, I'm just going to call it the CBLR, delivering the whole of the CBLR would assist with minimising or getting rid of the use of the lanes by people living in new homes on the sites, and would help with the bus proposals. Even if that's right, we can't deliver it. Council and or the County Highway Authority have compulsory powers. They could get on with it if they want to. They have a shed load of SIL money, over £7 million, just from these developments. So isn't it for them to get their act together rather than the appellants who can't actually do this anyway?
Again, that's really beyond my remit.
Right, okay. Right. So have you not thought of the consequences of you making your point that you think the whole CBLR is, would be desirable for the reasons you've explained? Have you not thought to yourself, well, what are the appellants, God bless them, meant to do about this, given that they can't bring about the delivery of the entire CBLR, but my clients and indeed the County Highway Authority could, if they wish to do so, do just that? Have you ever thought that?
I have thought that, and
what were the conclusions of your thoughts?
cross my mind that the appellants appear to have upwards of 30, 40 different landholders already as part of their agreement, and why couldn't they expand that to
Let's
deliver?
assume they can't, because we've been
more.
at it for decades. We've been at it for decades.
That's what crossed my mind.
We've been at this. Homes England's predecessors have been at this site since the 1970s. So, I mean, at least before I kick the bucket, I don't think we want to have them spending another 30, 40, 50 years trying to get a few more in. But anyway, let's just assume that that's it. The 30 that they've got. When you were thinking about this, you said you did think about this. So did you think that your clients, the council and the County Highway Authority, have actually got the ability to unlock this issue that you see? Did that cross your mind? That we haven't, but they have.
What crossed my mind is the need and the importance of delivering the cross-borough link road.
And you didn't think it through any more than that?
No.
Okay, I thought you told me just now that you had thought about who might deliver this.
And I explained who I had thought might deliver it.
Okay, all right. Not the people who've got the powers to do it then. No. All right, I'll leave it there. And then, thank you. My final point is a completely different point, really, and it's just about the car parking. Now, again, to be honest, I don't know whether Mr. Stevens really is going to be the person who would deal with this more comprehensively. But you've got a passage in your evidence about car parking, and you indicate that what's said in one of our documents is we've got no more than the maximum, obviously, and we've got some text around that, etc., etc. And you would like the position to be dealt with in a better way than that, if you like. Have you actually got any concrete ideas? I mean, would you be able to write something down on a piece of paper? Because to be honest, it would be a bit rum if the inspector and the Secretary of State thought these are acceptable applications, but Dr. Price has said something about car parking, and we're a bit concerned about car parking. It would be a bit rum not to try and solve the problem, wouldn't it? So would you be able to write something down on a piece of paper after you finish today, and perhaps through the council we could see some ideas as to what this...
It's not my role as a witness in this inquiry, as I'm sure you know, to design the scheme or to set out ideas. I could write down the sorts of things that I think would be appropriate in a parking strategy at this strategic level.
Okay. Well,
and I've done that on many occasions
Great.
for other clients
Great.
when developing design codes. So it really is at that sort of strategic level and that character area level about the sorts of solutions that might be looked at.
Let's see whether there's some way in which some form of condition perhaps could be drafted to cover that, because, you know, look, if there's a way we can resolve these things, why not resolve them? Because it's meant to be a collaborative process. One wonders sometimes. But anyway, good. Well, thank you, Dr. Price. I look forward to seeing that in due course, and I look forward to that clarification about building heights. Thank you for your time. Those are my questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kukowski. I need to just bear with me for a few moments while I check my... I think most of them have been covered.
God, it's so warm in here.
It is very warm. Getting a bit cooler.
Is it?
Yeah, just in the last 30 seconds or so.
That's because there's less hot air coming your way from me. Yes.
Just wait for re-examination.
I'm hot enough already. I don't need more hot air. You've got a three-piece suit on, so I do admire you.
Yeah, I'm regretting that. Yeah, I won't be tomorrow. I do have one question, but I've just lost it, so just bear with me a moment. Yeah, and my only question really is to do with expectations from a master plan, and would a more detailed master plan raise expectations from occupants of the site and the surrounding area about what could be delivered, in that a master plan shouldn't be potentially too detailed, but should it is there a happy medium that needs to be reached?
I agree about happy medium. I also agree that it should raise expectations, and we should be seeking to raise the bar, and that's the very purpose behind having a master plan design code, is that you should be looking to maximise the quality out of the site. And all too often, I deal with applications coming through at all stages. All too often, some initial joy and vision is lost through the reserve matters process, when via a robust master plan and a robust design code, you can start to make sure that isn't lost, if that makes any sense. So I've done a number of reviews of design codes coming forward for a couple of authorities where I've recommended at an early stage, and as Mr. Katkowski says, it's about collaborative working and trying to get in early and starting that conversation with design. And the quote that I gave from the new National Model Design Code, if you start that conversation early and you get design mentioned early in the process, and all parties, including people like Mr. Thornton, get involved, they know what they're working with at that stage, and everybody's happy. They're not going off in different directions at reserve matters stage and then coming into conflict. And this issue around conflict in the planning process, especially around design, is something that design codes, I think, my understanding, is that they were designed and developed to try and avoid. I don't think conflict, aside from lawyers, it doesn't do anybody any good in the planning process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Ponta, you have some questions in
Yeah,
the examination?
3 points, I think, so in total. Let's go back to policy C1, shall we?
Okay.
I'm conscious that I've got my planning witness to come, but we dipped our toe into some policy issues, and we're going to do so again, I think. So CD 5.2, PDF page 31, hard copy page 25. And you remember that you were taken to sub-paragraph A of the policy, which sets out the conditions for the grant of planning permission, sets out one of the conditions for the grant of planning permission, namely an agreed master plan for the comprehensive development of the site. Do you see that? The next sentence then tells you what that master plan should include, namely the wider area of the Pickerings Farm site, including the safeguarded land extending to Coot Lane. Do you see that?
I do.
And provision for a range of land uses to include residential, employment, commercial uses and so on. So two requirements which you accept are met. Extends to Coot Lane and has a range of land uses.
It does.
Assume I come along to you with a one-page master plan that has a plan showing a red line extending to Coot Lane and lists a range of land uses. Would that be an acceptable master plan to which you think the local planning authority should give its agreement in accordance with policy C1?
No, it certainly wouldn't be, and that's the point I was trying to make in response to Mr. Katkowski when I said, but a master plan should provide a whole lot more than just those things. So, yeah, no, it wouldn't be acceptable.
So let's just be clear about this, because it now falls on the Secretary of State to decide that question as to whether or not there's an agreed master plan on the recommendation of the inspector. Should the Secretary of State be satisfied with the contents of the master plan simply because it extends to Coot Lane and includes a range of land uses?
I don't think he should be. He or she should be, whoever that may be at the point.
Thank you very much indeed. Building for a healthy life is my second point. Now, you've explained that you use the headings from that document as the structure for your assessment in your proof. You were taken to it, and for each of the headings, if I can call them that, there are lists, and it tells us
There are.
what green looks like and what red looks like. So a series, if you like, of good characteristics under each of the headings and bad characteristics. I think you were partly criticised for not having gone through the process of applying those lists under each of your headings. Do you recall that?
I do.
And you explained what you did do in terms of using Building for a Healthy Life as a structure. Do you have the design and access statement there?
I do.
CD 1.17, I think it is. Page 82 of that document is the start of a little section numbered 10 with a main heading, Design Guidance, and a subheading on page 82, Building for a Healthy Life.
Yes.
And what it does is go through, by reference to each of the headings in the Building for Healthy Life document, and assesses not the whole master plan area, because this is the design and access statement, the individual appeal schemes.
Yes.
Do you know if it goes through each of the lists of
It doesn't.
what green looks like and each of the lists of what red looks like in coming to conclusions?
It doesn't.
To what extent does that approach mirror the approach that you've taken, Dr. Price?
It takes a similar approach with different conclusions in some areas, but it takes a similar approach of looking at the sort of generality of the questions as opposed to the minutiae of the individual points.
Thank you very much. Lastly, parking, please. You're asked to write down what a parking strategy that you'd be content with looks like, and it may be that we can, outside of the inquiry, there's a discussion going on planning conditions, and that can feature, if needs be, as a specific subject. But just turn up your proof of evidence again, please, if you would. Page 28. This is in the section that deals with cycle and car parking. Paragraph 4.10.3, what does that paragraph do in terms of setting out what you consider should form part of a good parking strategy?
Well, it outlines what one should be, and it's a good parking strategy for the whole of the master plan site. wouldn't be the same across the whole of the master plan site. You've got different typologies, different building types, different densities in different locations. You may have apartments, you may have a range of different types of properties with different parking requirements. So as I mentioned, I think in evidence in chief, towards the edge, you may expect a different solution than what you'd expect around the heart of the site, around the hub. And and that is, as any good designer, I know Mr. Thornton knows, we will have different strategies in different places. Okay. And you don't want to have areas where you're dominated by frontage car parking, because it can damage the street scene and create a dominance effect by cars if you have 90-degree frontage bays across long lengths. Some authorities have very fixed policies in this regard. It's not the case in Lancashire that there is a fixed policy on the number of cars per run, but I'm working currently for an authority where it won't allow more than 6 parking bays, uninterrupted frontage bays, anywhere. And that's very clearly written and very helpful. Okay. But it's that sort of thing, that sort of level that you'd expect. Going into the character part of the code, towards the end of the code, there could be some general principles about the need for a varied parking strategy that then introduces how that varied appropriate parking strategy might be delivered across the different character areas.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Price. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Price. Okay, we're now on 2024. The next evidence then would be Mr. Lloyd doing viability,
yes,
which had been scheduled for tomorrow.
Yes, and I think needs to remain scheduled for tomorrow because that's when he's available.
Right, okay. Okay, looks like we're in for an early finish.
We're slightly constrained in particular this week by availability. That eases into next week. So.
Okay, right. Okay. Unless there's anything else then that anyone wants to raise. I mean, I know I've got matters to get back to everyone on tomorrow.
Yes.
I won't do that. I haven't had an opportunity to do that so far. With the section 106, presumably tomorrow you'll be able to, or later in the week, you'll be able to get back to us on that.
Later in the week.
Yep.
I don't think anything's going to... Meeting on Thursday afternoon, sir, so
okay,
we won't be here, will we? So
okay.
So in effect, you're here at the beginning of this week 2, I think, where we've got to.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Actually, in due course, so if you could just let us know about the hotel situation, because obviously, if there's an issue with you moving, then we're moving.
I was just going to come on to that. I know that Mr. Eastham and Mr. Bow aren't here. They may be watching on YouTube. Yeah. Over lunchtime, I did take the opportunity just to book another hotel. So I will have the pleasure of moving out this evening and moving into another one, just to ensure that there is no prospect of any alleged bias.
We might move it out of our hotel anyway for other reasons. So
as long as you don't turn up in
exactly. Would you mind mentioning where you'll be so that we can avoid it?
I can do offline if that's
because we might. I'm not going to go into details. Yes, Mr. Ponter is
we've got visitors.
Right. Okay. The only other thing is if I haven't received the written statements from the interested parties yet, but I will chase that probably tomorrow when everyone is back.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure we've got email addresses, so if they don't appear, we'll please leave that with us and we'll try and secure them.
Thank you. That'd be appreciated. Thank you. Any other procedural matters?
No, thanks, sir.
No, in which case it's 3:40. We'll adjourn and be back here 10:30 tomorrow.
10:30, isn't it?
Wow.
Yes.
It's a good job it's tonight I'm moving hotel, isn't it?
Yes, early finish today.
I suppose that's
great. That's great. Oh, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.